this going. Okay, I think we are ready now. So welcome everybody to the Flameless Fireside podcast. We have Garrett in the hot seat tonight. Garrett from Seattle, who is obviously 41 years old. If you couldn't tell by his name, Garrett Seattle 41. So just before we get started, I'd like to ask everybody, please, if you enjoy what we're doing, like us on Facebook, subscribe to our YouTube channel. All of that kind of helps support the show as we grow and get this bigger and bigger. So we really appreciate everybody coming tonight. And we will get started by introducing Garrett. Yeah. Garrett, how are you, man?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing good. So I don't know much about you, which is always good because it makes the questions, getting to know you a little bit, and just seem more natural, right? I can ask you just who you are, what you're all about, what's going on in your life, you know, what makes you tick, and it comes good. So tell us a little bit about yourself, man. Obviously you live in Seattle, kids, divorced, what do you do for work? You know, all those good things. Tell us about you.
All of it. Let's see. So yeah, I'm in Seattle. I'm in a small town called South Prairie, just right outside of Bonnie Lake.
Okay.
Was married for about 10 years, got 4 kiddos, 3 girls and a little boy. Currently for employment, I run my own business. Been doing that for about the last 6 years. And on the side of that, I'm also a volunteer firefighter EMT, and I'm currently going for my medic as well. So, I mean, that's pretty much me in a nutshell. I mean, come from a family of 6 kids with myself being the oldest. Folks are still married, live down in the Tri-Cities, and they've been married for going on 42 years now. So apparently they did something right, and I screwed up somewhere along the way, you know, but
welcome to the club, right? So
right, exactly. So, you know, it's been an adventure, I will say that, getting to this point in my life. It's had its ups and downs, but I mean, there have been some great blessings along the way and trials that you learn from and go, you know, learn from it and move on.
Right. So now I'm sorry, tell me again, how many kids do you have?
I've got 4.
4. Okay. 4 all right, kids. Great. Even split, 2 boys, 2 girls, or
3 girls and a little boy. Last one was it for me. So.
Okay. All right. What are we looking at age range on them?
We range from 12 down to 5.
12 to 5. Okay. You still got some little ones.
I do. And yeah, they keep me on my toes quite a bit. So, I mean, they're good kids. I mean, they go to some of the single adult activities we've had, like the campouts and everything. And as Grant and a few of them can attest to, they're good kids. So, I mean, I've been extremely blessed. I didn't get the curse like my mom would always tell me. You know, I hope they turn out just like you. Thank goodness they didn't. But they're good kids so far, and I'm couldn't be more pleased with who they are.
That's fantastic. Now, obviously, I think at one point maybe you kind of misspoke. I think you said you're still married or something, but we're divorced.
Oh, no.
So you're married.
I was married for 10 years, divorced for
10 years. Okay. Or maybe I completely heard it wrong. So that could be me. But
I don't know. Married for 10 years, and I've been divorced for coming up on 4 this go around.
Okay. All right. Great. So yeah, obviously you find yourself in this crazy LDS dating world of, like, you know, weirdness and trying to find out where we fit in anymore, and sitting there at church on Sunday going like, why am I here? But I'm still here because I'm doing the right thing, but I feel like I don't fit in. All of that good stuff that we've all felt at least once or twice. By the way, I think your lighting, you might want to just switch another lighting. It kind of looks like you got your fire truck headlights going off or something up there.
Light going on there.
Yeah.
Give that a shot. Hopefully that fixes that problem.
There we go. Yeah. Much better. Great. Okay. So obviously you live in Seattle, you run your own business. Tell us about that. What kind of business you run?
So back in 2003, I started working for a company called Varsity Contractors, and they primarily had the contract for the LDS Church, meaning we would go in and clean the carpets, do the upholstery, scrub the gym floors, just do all the deep cleaning that the members couldn't do, and that was our job. So for about a span of 4 to 5 years, I was in church 6 days a week. I mean, you can't get much holier than that. I mean, can you? It was quite the adventure. We had a good time, had a good crew. At one point, I became a supervisor for varsity, and I ended up hiring my brother and one of my sisters. So I mean, the whole crew was siblings. And for the 2 years that I had my siblings working for me, we were varsity's #1 crew in the Western region. We were, able to get in buildings and get out of them faster than other crews could and keep the quality there. Um, so I did that, and then did some odd and end jobs when I got married. And then finally I'm like, you know what? I'm sick of making money for the guy upstairs and bringing home a puny paycheck. And so my ex and I talked, and she's like, well, what do you think? I'm like, well, we can do it. And so we gathered up the cash and sunk about $80,000 into the business and started out on our own. And here I am 6 years later, still running strong and enjoying it. It's there's just something gratifying about having your own business and producing a product that your clients are absolutely thrilled with and refer you to other people. And there's, along with that, you have that flexibility to do good deeds for people. There was a gal I went in, and it was about a month before Christmas, and I said, she had me come in, and I looked at the carpets. I'm like, you're looking about $600. And she's like, well, I can't afford that. I'm like, well, you know what? Don't worry about it. I'll take care of it. And went in, I did this entire house and put everything away, rolled it up, went in and just kind of told her, hey, this is kind of what you need to do. This is what to look out for, and didn't charge her a penny. I walked away from a $600 check all because I chalked it up to service. And for me, that was the best feeling ever, knowing that I made a difference in someone's life, and I have that ability to do so, and I don't have anybody to answer to because I made that choice.
Very nice.
That was really, really nice of you.
Sounds like you're kind of a charitable type of guy then.
I've been told I have a heart somewhere, but I can't find it.
Well, it's always unfair to ask the ex about that because we know how that goes. So,
right.
Well, perfect. I mean, obviously running your own business can be high risk, high reward if it's done right. But you're also a firefighter on the side, you said, is that right?
Correct. Yes. Yes.
Okay.
So my dad was firefighter for Hanford Fire down in Southeast Washington. And the significance behind that, it was the Hanford nuclear site was a key turning point in World War II. It produced the uranium that was put in one of the nuclear bombs that we dropped on Nagasaki.
Yeah.
So my dad was in it Dad retired at 40 years in the fire service. And I remember as a kid, we always went out there and we got to go ride in the trucks and hang out with the fire crews and stuff like that. And so watching my dad and his work ethic and hearing some of the things he got to do, it's like, I want to do that. And so I came home off my mission in 2001 and went down to the fire department there in Benton City and signed on as a volunteer. And I did that stretch for about 10 years as well. And then when I got married and moved up here, I hired on with Mountain View Fire Rescue as volunteer firefighter EMT. And I've been there since 2010. So, it's once again, it's just another labor of love. I don't, everybody thinks, oh, I want that shiny truck and the girls that come with it. For me, it's not about that. For me, it's about the fact of serving my community and those that I love.
So you must have some pretty crazy stories then. We'll get into that in just a minute, but I mean, that's probably one that we could go a whole podcast over, right? I'm guessing. But,
oh, totally.
I just have one question. Which month were you?
Go ahead.
Which month were you in the calendar for that firehouse?
Calendars are for wannabes.
Oh, you didn't pose shirtless and
didn't make it.
Shirtless with an axe.
Right. Wearing your pants and your fireman's hat with an axe or something.
With his boots on.
it's kind of frowned upon in the industry. You don't put yourself in a calendar. Now those New York boys, they can do it all they want, but out here, no, we don't do that.
That's not the way it goes, huh?
But I will say, the one biggest blessing of being in the fire service, and here's kind of interesting fact, is the fact that my last boy was born at home. We didn't go to the hospital. We didn't do a midwife. We intentionally delivered him at home, and I got to deliver him. So I can literally tell my son, I brought you into this world, and I can take you out.
You can literally say that. That's awesome.
Always one of those things that kids love to hear, right? So,
Right.
yes. So yeah, I'm familiar with kind of the Southeast Washington, Hanford area. My father was a nuclear chemist over at Hanford. Pretty much growing up, I grew up over in Richland. I'm
Okay.
somewhat ashamed to announce that I shouldn't say ashamed. Tri-Cities, it was one of those places that just felt too small when I was younger, and I couldn't wait to blow the doors off of that town. And
Right.
yeah, now I live in Portland, and I couldn't wait to blow the doors off of this town too. But I got kids here, so I'm stuck. Right? You jump
Right.
from one from the fire into the frying pan, and it's So, but now I love going back and seeing family, and it's nice to have that smaller town feel. Now I can appreciate that now that I'm older, and I'm like, okay, city life kind of stinks. I'm stuck in traffic like all the time for work and things like that. I'm like, man, it'd be really nice to a traffic jam in the Tri-Cities is like, man, it took me half an hour to get home. Like real life struggles, right? Like, yeah, it took me
Right.
half an hour to go. Like in Portland, like I've been in spots before where it's taken me 2.5 hours to go one stop on the freeway, and that's no fun. So anyways, I totally am off on a tangent here, but so you grow up in the Tri-Cities. How do you end up in Seattle? Like what takes you up there?
Oh, golly. So I left Tri-Cities in 07 and went over to North Kitsap County to go through their fire academy, get my firefighter one, hazmat, ops, and all that stuff, right?
Hmm.
And I had to quit varsity to go through all that because it was a good solid 6-month program. I mean, literally Monday through Friday, you're sitting in a classroom or you're out on the drill ground, so I was over here for a while, and then I came back home and was on what was it, LDS Singles. It was a dating website back in the day, and I was on there just scrolling and saw my ex's profile and clicked, and we started talking the very next day, and next thing you know, we're driving back and forth, and what was it, March or April, she approached me, and she's like, hey, what do you think about moving over to Seattle? And I'm like, I don't know. And next thing I know, within 24 hours, I was packing a U-Haul and driving over to Seattle and finding an apartment. So,
24
yeah,
hours. Why such a quick turnaround?
I don't know. The heart has you doing foolish things.
It was just because that love drug you there, huh?
It did. It was one of those connections that just hit, and it just felt right. And you're like, this is it, and I'd given a lot of thought and prayed about it. And at the time I was kind of in between jobs, and I'm like,
You're like, hey, I don't need any more than a day. I've got this figured out. I'm out of here.
I mean, she was a pretty sweet talker. She's like, this, that, I can get you a job set up. And I'm like, packed it up. And even my dad pulled me aside, and he's like, I've never seen you do anything like this on a whim. He's like, you normally have a structure or a plan in place. He's like, you're just doing this off the cuff. I said, I know. I said, it's crazy. He's like, well,
Spontaneous.
It was extremely spontaneous. I've never been that spontaneous in my life. And so that's how I ended up here. And that was 13 years ago.
Okay, so we know you mentioned quickly, you kind of brushed over the fact that you delivered your own son. So
I did.
Share that story with us, because I'm sure it's a good one.
It is. So my ex didn't like hospitals. From our first child, she went and had a bad experience, and she didn't do a hospital since it was either midwives or birthing centers. And I had just gone so we found out we were pregnant with Luke, And I had just gone to a seminar on OBGYN and how birthing and all that had been changing, how deliveries have been changing. And one thing they mentioned was that water births are a lot more therapeutic, and for the baby and the mom, it's a quicker recovery and it's less stress on the child being born. And so I did a lot of reading up on it. I went to my ex and I said, "Hey, what do you think about doing a water birth?" And I gave her all the material and we did a lot of research, and she's like, "Yeah, and let's do it." And we talked to a midwife and, weighed the pros and the cons, and we're like, "Well, let's do it." And so we did. And I went to my chief and I said, "Hey, chief, this is kind of what we're thinking." I said, "Could I, maybe take a medic unit out of service and have it as standby at my place?" And he's like, "Well, who else are you going to have with you?" I said, "Well, I'm going to have, one of the guys in my ward who's a King County medic at the time." And he's like, "Yeah, that's fine. Just let me know." I'm like, "Cool." And so the day came for it to happen. Midwife showed up, filled up the inflatable tub. I called up the brother in my ward, said, "Hey, it's happening. Meet me at 9-4. He met me at 9-4. We grabbed the medic unit, parked in the driveway, and got up there. And the midwife's like, "Do you want to do this or do you want me to do it?" And I'm like, "Well, I would like to do it." She's like, "You're on."
Oh, wow.
And I looked at Dan. I said, don't fail me." Dan's like, "You got this. You got it." And, it's one thing when your skill set and you're polished and you're honed and you got it, and you go work on the stranger that you don't know, you're pretty confident. When it comes to your own wife and your child, I was scared to death. I'm like, "Oh my gosh, I've got 2 lives literally in my hands. One mess up, it could be game over." And, I said a quick prayer. I'm like, "Heavenly Father, just guide me in this." And things went smooth. And then we hit a hiccup. He came out and he wasn't crying for about the first minute. And normally you want an infant crying within the first 10 seconds. And so we both kind of wash him, and Dan and I are hovering, and the midwife's sitting there hovering, and my wife's starting to freak out. And finally we ended up having to do a lot of suctioning because he had a lot of mucus plugged up in him. And we got him pinked up, and everything was good. We sat there and monitored for about an hour or so. And then we just stayed at home, but it was the most amazing thing that I've ever had happen to me, to sit there and be part of that process. There's just something about it you really can't put into words. And I look at him today, and he's 5, and I'm like, man, I helped bring him into the world. Not many dads get that opportunity. They say, "Yeah, I was in the operating room," or, "Yeah, I got to cut the cord," but I can say I helped to deliver him. And it's something that I'll never forget. And it's been a blessing, to know that I had a hand in that.
Well, I think that's an amazing experience. I don't know if I could do it. Like, both my kids were C-section, and I was there in the room, and they kind of had that little drape or whatever you want to call over it, and they're like, "Oh yeah, the baby's coming out." I'm like, "Yeah, I'm good." Just hold it up when you got it. We'll go good. I don't want to see all the stuff. We're all right.
So, that wasn't my delivery. I've delivered. I think I've done a total 3 or 4 deliveries in my 10 years. So it's not something you get to do all the time, but it's pretty awesome to have a hand in that.
Okay, so deliveries while you were out being a medic?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So why were they just at home, or were they side of the highway? What are we talking?
Home. They were at home. And it wasn't, so the first time a woman ever has a child, it takes a little bit longer for that to happen. But as they progress and they have their second kid and third kid, I mean, they just come a little bit quicker than anticipated. And some women aren't ready for that. Or they're sitting there and they're waiting for their husband to come home, or they have car issues, or, you know, something always happens and it ends up being at home.
Wow.
Wow. So now you guys were married for 11 years. Is that right? Did I catch that correctly? 10 years.
10 years.
Okay. Now, did you get married? I'm assuming you went on a mission, right? I think you had mentioned that. Okay.
I did. So 99 to 01, I served a mission. Yeah.
Okay. Where'd you go?
So started out in Nebraska, and then 6 months in, had to go home on medical,
Okay.
and then was turned around and sent back out to Chicago.
Chicago.
And-
Interesting.
What a big change.
Yo, you have no idea. Yeah, huge culture shock. You go from out in the boondocks to straight up downtown ghetto. But
Chicago's beautiful. I love that city.
Yeah, but he
Chicago-
didn't get to serve in the beautiful parts. Like
He was
that's
down
like
in the
me. I
ghetto.
served in Houston, Spanish speaking, but I was in Houston, Spanish speaking. And people are always asking me like, "Hey, did you serve it? How was this area?" I'm like, I don't know. I was down like where La Fiesta Market is.
So I did bump into Michael Jordan's mom while on my mission. We were out tracking and bumped into her, and that was pretty
Very
cool.
cool.
Now, wait a minute. You don't just bump into Michael Jordan's mom. So this is
And how
like,
did you know it's her?
not just tracking like any old neighborhood, right? Like she's probably living in a house that's like a small palace, I'm imagining, right?
It wasn't. I mean, you would think that she would be set up nicely.
Wait,
but,
Michael
I mean,
Jordan didn't take care of his mom. Is that what you're telling us?
No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying she lived in a very modest, nice home. She wasn't one to flash, "Oh, look at me, I'm the mom of Michael Jordan." I mean, she lived in a very
So
modest home.
how did you know it was Michael Jordan's mom? It's not like everybody knows what she looks like. At least I don't. I don't know.
She probably said like,
She
"Hey,
wearing
you
like a
know my
shirt?
son, like Michael."
I know Michael.
He just
He's
wears
my
his
son.
jersey around everywhere.
Yeah.
When you come upon a mailbox that has Jordan 23 on the mailbox,
I guess you kind of know.
Man, you
If
know.
she's out picking
Or
up
they're a
the
major
mail.
fan, right? Like diehard fan.
so I mean, it was just a very friendly, "Hey, you know, we're in the neighborhood" type thing. We didn't make a big deal out of it, but I mean, she's a very nice lady. You know, and it's not like we went knocking on her door every weekend. "Hey, can we," you know, it was just it was cool to get to meet her. And then we just, you know, continued on with our work. I wasn't in that area for long. But
So this
You
is
know,
when
it-
you were down in the hood? Or was this not
well,
when you
this
were in the
was
hood?
this was when I was in the nicer parts of Chicago. The hood was when I was like out in Gary, Indiana, where you're the only two white guys walking the streets. That's the hood. But no, Chicago was a lot of fun. A lot of good times. So
Those make for the best missions. When I was in Houston, we used to go down and we used to get invited to go play basketball. So we'd be driving by and we'd end up, you know, the guys would be like, "Hey, come play with us," and we're like, "Why would we come play with you at white shirts and ties on?" And I didn't know, but apparently there was a couple of BYU basketball stars that were in my mission at one point, and the mission president had them go down into the hood and just play basketball all day long with the guys in the parks, and they had to play in their white shirts and ties. And then afterwards they would make contacts and try to, you know, get some teaching appointments, which, you know, it worked out pretty well for them doing that. But the people in the neighborhood remembered that. So we come riding through on our bikes and they're like, "Yo, church boys, come over here and play basketball." And we were like, "What?"
Basketball with
Like-
us.
It was kind of odd, but then we started doing it. It was kind of fun.
That's awesome.
yeah, you know, you get those. I mean, there were parts of our mission that, yeah, you'd be tracked in an area and yeah, there'd be kids out with their hoops in the cul-de-sac or in the middle of the street and they'd be playing ball. So I mean, yeah, there were times that we put down our scriptures and go play a little hoop and then get right back to it. But I tell you what, the humidity would just absolutely kill you.
Really?
Oh yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, there would be times we'd get done and we're just soaked. I mean, our white shirts were soaked. We'd have to go back and change and get back out in the field.
Yeah, I went through several pairs of pants a day in Houston. you'd come back and you're like, well, it's lunch break, time to change our
Yeah.
clothes.
He
Hang
used
your
to,
shirt
like,
up,
yeah.
your pants up.
I
And then when you
just
come
remember-
back in the night, your pants have a salt line like right around the waist.
Yep. I remember it used to
No
be
fun.
very, very humid.
So, okay, so you go on your mission, you come home. It sounds like, I mean, I'm not the biggest mathematician, but sounds like there was a bit of a break between your mission and when you ended up getting married. So you spent a little time, right? Kind of dating around, trying to find that person, all that good stuff. Is that right?
Yeah, so I came home in 01 and did some work, got some schooling in, dated around. I mean, in Tri-Cities, I mean, like, there's not much there. There's
I know all
not.
about it.
So I mean, it was long distance dating. But for the most part, it was mostly just work for me, trying to save up to go to school. I was testing, get on fire departments, testing to get into academies. So dating kind of took a back seat for a bit. 2005, high school sweetheart had gotten out of a divorce and, gave her some space and time to heal and everything. And we started dating and things kind of got serious. And then I went to the fire academy and we worked through that. And I remember the last 3 days of the fire academy were my worst. The first day, or in those 3 days, my high school sweetheart / fiance at the time broke up with me.
Mhm.
And then not even 24 hours later, a cousin who I was really close with passed away. And then not even 12 hours after that, my step grandfather passed away and I had to go take an exam. And so once I got all that behind me, kind of, got back on LDS singles again and kind of looked around. And that's when I ran across my ex and that all happened back in November, December.
Now, wait,
And
when you
then-
say your ex, we're talking the high school sweetheart.
Yep.
All right.
Yep.
Okay.
And once I got that behind me, about February, I met my ex-wife and we started talking. And by April, I was over here in Seattle. And then June, we got married over in Spokane.
Wow. So you guys dated for what, 4 months?
About that. I mean,
That's pretty Mormon style. Yeah.
right. It's part of that
Yeah.
culture challenge, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, it was pretty quick for both of us. It just felt like the right thing to do. It was a pretty good connection there. And I'm like, well, why not? So she's like, well, what do you think about June 13th? I'm like, cool. And I looked at the calendar and saw it was a Friday the 13th. And I'm like, you sure you don't want to rethink this one?
Maybe move
Yeah.
it to Saturday.
Would have been nice.
Now, wait a second.
You
So,
think that was
somewhere in
jinxing it?
between- sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just saying, do you think that jinxed your marriage because it was Friday the 13th?
Anything's possible.
Are you superstitious?
No.
All right.
Okay, so somewhere in between there, you're dating your high school sweetheart, and then you switch to this other girl, right? And-
Right.
So what happened with the high school sweetheart? Like, I'm all building up this awesome man. Like, you found your high school sweetheart, and then you're like, yeah, and then I married this other lady. I'm like, what? Wait, what happened? Like,
So
that love story like fell off a cliff.
I never got an honest answer from her. I never, she's just like, that's it. And we just kind of went separate ways and I didn't look back, didn't ask.
So she just bailed on you, and you're like, all right, deuces, I'm out.
Pretty much, yeah. That's
Wow.
yeah.
Well, obviously, and was it one of those things where she's like married 2 months later? So there was like a side hustle going on and she didn't want to tell you about it?
I honestly, I don't know. I lost track of her.
I think that's a Mormon cultural thing is got those side hustles going.
Right.
Because I got Dear John on my mission from my high school sweetheart, and we thought, yeah, this is it. I get off my mission, we're gonna date and get married. And I got that Dear John letter like halfway through my mission, And then of course, I'm not celebrating it, but she definitely did struggle with the guy she picked. So she's had a rough,
Awesome.
20 something years. She's still married to him, but yeah, it's like, oh well.
Right.
Yeah, it seems like it's no well.
Well, it sounds like your high school sweetheart wasn't like, kind of one of those things that just crushes your soul. You rebounded pretty quick.
Yeah. It was kind of like, for me at that point, didn't look back, just keep moving forward. I just finished the academy. Now it's time to start going testing for fire departments and, start working, get a job again and get life moving. At that point, I just kind of had the mindset that if I sat there and did nothing or just mourned over it, I wasn't going to go anywhere. I was just going to sink. So stop
Right.
treading water and get moving.
So what makes you at this point then, I mean, you're into the fire department pretty heavily. What makes you kind of want to do your own business instead of just diving in with both feet and just being full-time fire department?
So, I mean, that's a pretty good question. So when you go into the fire service, they're looking for their optimal return on investment, right? I mean, any business owner knows that, right? If you're going to do a purchase or something, you're looking for that optimal return on investment. And in the fire service, they're looking for guys like anywhere from 22 to like 30, right? Because those guys are in their prime. You can train them the way you need them and get them where they need to be, and you'll have an asset for until they retire. Well, during that time, I was in my prime. I was, had everything I needed, all my certs, done the schooling. The problem is the economy wasn't there. Fire departments were not hiring. I mean, there were guys that should have been retiring and they were holding off on that because of where the economy was. And so for that 8 years that the economy was down, nobody was hiring. So my prime kind of came and went. And so, I mean, fire departments are very reluctant to hire anybody, once they're past 32, 33, that return on investment becomes really slim. And now that these guys are, you get older, now they start looking at, okay, what's the risk with this guy? If we put him if we send him in on search, is he going to die of a heart attack on us? Is he going to get injured on the job? Now
Hey,
we're out.
grandpa carry the fire hose type thing. Like,
Right.
yeah.
Right. Can this guy freaking throw on a hose pack and grab a hose load and climb 62 flights without freaking croaking before he hits flight number 10? So they look at things like that. So, my prime is kind of come and gone. And so I'm like, well, I trained for this. I've spent thousands of dollars to get this education that I have. By golly, I'm going to use it. And if it's in a volunteer capacity, then that's where I'm at.
And that was, what state were you in with that when you were trying
That's
to do that?
Washington.
That's Washington, but that was all the way across the country. I mean, we have there's forums and hiring sites and testing networks you go to, and they tell you who's hiring, who's not, what they want for requirements and all that. And during that time, there were very few people. I mean, there was a lot of lateral transfer going on, but not a lot of hiring going on. So, I kind of missed that boat, but it is what it is. Make the best of it.
Yeah, it's a tough job to get into. I know I'm from California, so I had a few friends of mine try to get into the fire service. In California, it's a pretty sweet gig. I mean, they basically just work 2 weeks out of the month, and they go to the firehouse for 2 weeks straight, 24-hour days, and then they're off the rest of the month. They're off 2 weeks. And we had a guy in our ward that was in the Santa Barbara area fire department. He ended up moving his family to Idaho, and it was cheaper for him to move to Idaho, fly in, spend 2 weeks at the firehouse, and fly back home and spend 2 weeks in Idaho with his family, and just take that monthly flight. It was a lot cheaper than living in California in Santa Barbara.
A lot of firefighters do that. I mean, we got guys that are up here on Seattle Fire that come out of the Tri-Cities because it's cheaper to live in the Tri-Cities than it is up here. I mean, you get a 3-bedroom, 2.5 bath house up here, you're paying, $600,000. You go down to the Tri-Cities, you're paying half that. So, I mean, it's all about location. But yeah.
Yeah, I know some guys that got into that, and you know, they have fantastic retirement. It's just a great career for them. It's yeah, and a lot of them just, I mean, they go on their calls and things like that, but a lot of times they're just kind of kicking around, and some of them are like, well, you're lower down on the totem pole, so guess who gets to scrub the floors, you know, type thing.
Right.
So
And,
there's,
and being in the fire service, kind of tying into tonight's topic. I mean, being in the fire service, even military or any civil service, I mean, it's a challenge to be a member. It really is. I mean, you're pushed. You're asked about your beliefs, and I remember when I was going through academy, I had I had on the academy t-shirt, and I had this drill instructor get right in my face. I mean, he wasn't even probably an inch from me. He's like, "What the heck are you doing wearing a white t-shirt? What do you think you are, some chief? You don't deserve to wear blah, blah, blah." I mean, he was just ripping me a new one. And I just sat there and I let him, get it out, get it off his chest. And then at lunchtime, I pulled him aside and kind of explained it to him. And this guy was a former Marine drill instructor. And once I'd explained it to him, he's like, "Oh, feel like a dick." He's like, "Sorry, man, I didn't know." And I'm like, "It is what it is." And, from that point forward, when he found out that I was LDS and that I did have standards and that I wasn't like anybody else in the academy, that I did, have integrity and everything, he treated me a lot differently, gave me more responsibility and more respect for it, but, being a member in the fire service, it's rough. Especially, when you get that hazmat call that you got to go decon and they're stripping you down to your underwear, and here you are standing in your garments and everybody's sitting there poking fun at you.
yeah,
There's,
So so it's different than I guess living outside the state of, like, living outside of Utah is a little different. So I know who I work for, now I'm from California. I processed in through the office in LA, and when I got my first office assignment, I was assigned to Salt Lake. I'd never lived in Utah in my life. I grew
Right.
up in the church, but never lived in Utah. And it's kind of along the lines of, like, it was very, very much a culture shock for me, living in Utah, being from California. And I kind of always jokingly told people, I said, I feel like a hippie Mormon, moving to Utah from California, because I had these, like, I guess I wasn't really into the whole culture, or what they call the Mormon culture or the church culture. And there was a lot of cultural commandments that that I just didn't live by, because they weren't real commandments. They were more of like, hey, this is how we do things, and this is how we do things in the ward, and hey, the young man, if his hair's not cut right, can't pass the sacrament. Those kinds of weird cultural commandments that we run into. So, and that's kind of the topic we have for tonight. Is I know a lot of us struggle with cultural commandments, and trying to deal with that. And I think one of the biggest cultural commandments that we deal with is the fact that we're divorced. And it just seems like one of the biggest cultural commandments is why didn't you stick it out? Why didn't you stay married? Why didn't you honor your temple commitment to stay married for eternity? And I think a lot of us in this podcast, and even on the groups on Facebook, we talk a lot about those feelings, of feeling ashamed, or feeling like we don't fit. And so we just kind of wanted to open up the discussion about what cultural commandments, Garrett, that you've run into that you felt uncomfortable with. And maybe not so much because you live in Washington, but I have a few when my days living in Utah.
Yeah, the whole being divorcing and trying to live the culture, it is a struggle, because you're trying to figure out how your life fits back into church, right? I mean, here you are, you've had the family, you've gone to family ward, and now your life's just kind of changed, and you're trying to figure out, how does my life and church all work together now. And it's, for me, it's been a struggle, because I know there have been days that I get up and I'm like, yeah, I know I should go to church, but I just don't feel worthy enough to go, you know. And the one thing that I keep telling myself is even though I'm not perfect, the church isn't perfect. And it's something that we've been commanded and asked to do, and therefore I have to set an example for the kids. So
Yeah, I think,
it's been hard. And
yeah, I mean, I had a guy that I was working with when I was in Mexico City, and he used to tell me that when his dad was a bishop years ago in California, he used to tell people, he's like, if the church doesn't smell like cigarettes and coffee, then it's not a real ward. And he was trying to refer to the people that should be in the ward, the people that are struggling. People struggling with, if they're struggling with smoking, still come to church. If they're struggling with coffee, still come to church. And that was kind of his way of saying that, and I think that's a cultural command we could probably point out right now, is that the only people allowed to go to church are people who are good members of the church, or people who are worthy members of the church. And that is completely false doctrine. That's completely false.
Right.
And
the church isn't there for those of us that are perfect. It's for those of us that they're struggling, that are there for the fellowship. The church culture, the gospel culture, the way that it was, trying to remember who gave the talk. I believe it was Dallin H. Oaks. He says something to the fact that church culture, it's a distinctive way of life, right? I mean, you look at, you go anywhere, and if people are living the gospel and doing what we have been commanded to do and asked to do, you can almost pick out a member of the church anywhere you go. I mean, I used to be able to do that, and not so much nowadays, because, we all falter here and there. But Elder Oaks, he said, as a way to help us keep the commandments of God, members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints have what we call a gospel culture. And it's a distinctive way of life, a set of values and expectations and practices common to all members. He says the gospel culture comes from the plan of salvation, the commandments of God, and the teachings of the living prophets. It guides us in the way we raise our families and live our individual lives. The principles stated in the proclamation on the family are a beautiful expression of this gospel culture. And so if you take that, that culture, I mean, it's ultimately it's a roadmap that's been given to us on how to live and how to go about our day-to-day lives, right?
yeah.
I mean, as a kid growing up, I was taught that, you don't swim, you don't play sports, you don't do anything on Sunday unless it's family oriented, right? Or it's focused on the gospel. And that's how I was raised. And I think as time has gone on, those standards and that culture is kind of changed now, more so, right? I mean,
Well, I think it has to change. I think with the converts that are flowing into the church, we can't be so close-minded. At least that's my opinion.
we can't be as rigid or as structured, because it's kind of like, going from a hot warm climate straight to freezing cold. I mean, you're gonna have shock if you do that, and so yeah, you have to ease into it. But at the same time, there are standards there as well. And what I might consider keeping the Sabbath day holy to Celeste or Everett, that may be something completely different, right? So we all have our own expectations and the way that we go about doing that. Because what works for me may not work for somebody else. And so you have to find out what works for you. And that can be a challenge in today's society, whereas society right now is becoming very close-minded, very judgmental, and very anti-Christ.
Yeah, and I
I think
think
that's a
it's
great
important that, like you said, that each of us find what works for us, like what you're saying on the Sabbath day, right? What is it that our house is going to put together to show the Lord that we've set aside a day for Him? But at the same time, we can't say, well, we've decided to do X, Y, and Z, and the Smiths across the street aren't, so that they're doing something wrong. And I think that's what the struggle is with the culture. Like we come up with what works for our family, and what we think is what the Lord would have us do. And then we kind of project it onto others and expect everyone to kind of follow what we've put in place, when that was just something we should have done just for our family, and not, kind of put that on everyone else's plate. So
Right.
Yeah, that's the struggle, I think, in the church, is like, that's exactly what happens, is that we get the basic commandment, like say the word of wisdom, and then somebody goes and says, well, I started eating less red meat and I started not drinking caffeine, and so therefore, because I'm more enlightened now, that becomes the standard, or it becomes something that gets pushed, and then it's just a weird thing how we inject those things. I know my son was distraught one time. He's living in Utah now, and he called and said that his friend was thinking about not going back to church because he was getting interviewed to receive the Aaronic, or the Melchizedek priesthood. And the stake president, when he got to the stake president for the interview, the stake president said, "Hey, you have a beard. You probably should shave that if you're going to become an elder." And he's like, "What?" He never thought like a beard was going to be an issue. But in Utah, apparently with this stake president, he felt he had to look a certain way to receive the Melchizedek priesthood. And,
I bet you
unfortunately,
Jesus
that's
had a
not true.
beard, Corey. I
I
think
know,
Jesus
Jesus
had
had
a
a
beard.
beard. Brigham
That
Young
sounds
had a
like
beard. I think a lot of people had beards.
I think Brigham Young had a huge beard.
They hadn't invented electric razors yet, so they have an excuse.
So
Yeah, Nick
yeah,
Hughes, he's
it
got
doesn't
some
apply
shade.
to them.
Jared showing off his big burly beard.
Yeah, we're gonna stop your video though, Jared. Nice beard though.
Well, and so I mean that happens over time. I mean, standards and expectations change, leadership changes, and it's just like when new management takes over a business, right? They look at it and like, okay, this works, this doesn't work, and they have that that discretion to make those calls. I mean, stake presidents are called to lead a stake, and if you get a stake president in there that doesn't like guys wearing ties and he wants all the guys wearing bow ties, he's going to make that a standard. Now, does that mean if you don't wear a bow tie and decide to wear a tie, you're not going to get the priesthood, or no?
Well, I think that's where they cross the line. I think that's where personal preference versus gospel doctrine is. That's where the line gets crossed, I believe.
Right.
That's
and the same thing with beards, because it doesn't say anywhere in gospel doctrine anything that you can't have a beard.
well, I go by this. I go by, if you go get your temple recommend interview, if you can answer those questions, you are worthy.
Exactly.
You're worthy, period. And none of those questions ask me how I dress when I go to church. They ask if I go to church, if I attend my meetings. They don't ask what I dress like when I go to my meetings. So they don't ask if when's the last time I shaved or had a beard and how long did I have a beard. They don't even ask me if I have tattoos. So these are all things that I think we need to be careful of, because converts come in all the time to church, and a convert might be going to church for 6 months, and then one day there's a picnic activity and they're at the stake center at the picnic activity and they're wearing shorts, and guess what? Their cap has a tattoo on it and nobody ever saw it before. And now they're like, oh, Brother Hubbard has a tattoo. I don't have a tattoo, by the way, but if I had one, they'd be like, Corey's got a tattoo on his calf.
Corey's
And
got
then
a
everybody
tramp
would
stamp.
think like, yeah, I got a tramp stamp.
Yeah.
It's a
So
big
rebellious.
butterfly. I got it when I was 20, so it doesn't look like a butterfly anymore. It looks like a big bat.
One
baby.
area that I think is huge right now within the group that we're speaking with here is the fact, and I think Garrett, you kind of touched on this, is that the culture within the church when it comes to divorce is really brutal.
It is.
And I think that a lot of us, when we're faced with that decision on how do I handle the marriage I'm currently in, and we recognize that it's not going to be fixed because only one person's trying to make it fix or to make it work. The Lord's okay. The Lord told me it was okay to have a divorce. And he told me personally that he wanted me to be happy. But there were many people within the culture that just would not, and probably still don't believe me, even when I say I've received confirmation from the Lord that way, because they have this in their mind that the Lord can fix anything. And so if you try hard enough, he should be able to fix your marriage. And I think that's true if both people are trying as much as they can, but it doesn't work when it's just one person trying, and the Lord will not override someone else's agency.
Correct.
fix
And that's
it.
where your agency comes in. You can sit there and work on it as hard as you want, but unless both people are willing to work on it, it's not going to work. It doesn't. I mean, you can sit there and pray, but the Lord's not going to sit there and intervene,
Right.
you know.
Yeah,
Um,
that's a tough call. I mean, it's sad that people would think that. I mean, unfortunately, my ex, I divorced my ex because she was a handful, and that's all I'm going to say. You can read it how you want, but it was a very difficult time with her, and she still every once in a while gets a crazy mood and calls me and says, whatever happened, and what kind of a man are you that you didn't fight for us and fight for our eternal marriage and fight for our eternal family. So she still every once in a while likes to call, a preemptive call that there's an emergency, and then roll into something like that, which I have to quickly end that call with her. But yeah, my ex is always bringing that up whenever she gets a chance to talk to me on the phone.
yeah. And, back to the whole being divorced and the culture shock to that. I mean, I remember, we'd been in the ward for 4 years when my ex filed for divorce. And I remember that first Sunday going to church on my own without the family or the kids. And I mean, people knew what happened. I mean, when you have the bishop who lives 2 doors down from you, he knows what's going on. And that's a different story. But when you go to church and people find out you're divorced, I mean, you get treated differently. There's a weird feeling about it when you walk in. It's not that warm, fuzzy, hey, I'm at church, this is, oh my goodness, you don't get that. And it's sad to lose that feeling. I mean, some wards aren't all that way. Some of them still include you and stuff like that. But for me, I noticed that, my first Sunday at church by myself, it felt extremely different. It felt very lonely and distant.
Do you think it's because they're not sure what to say? Like, I think they're
That's
just
exactly
not even sure what to say, so they don't say anything, which then makes
exactly.
you feel so alienated that you're just like, does no one
Well,
care?
I think it's not so much that they don't know what to say. I think it's the fact that they're afraid of the fact of saying something that might hurt or, may cause further pain. I was talking to one of the guys in the ward. See, in my ward, we had a medic and a firefighter, and we always powwowed. And I remember after church, I went up to him like, hey, I said, is it me or, why am I feeling distant here? And he's like, it's because people don't know how to approach it. They don't want to inflict more injury. They want to, they don't, yeah, they just don't know how to approach it. And it's all new to them. I mean, granted, we are seeing a significant rise in divorce in the church itself. It's staggering at the rate of divorce that's happening. But
Well, I think a lot of that is the stressors. I mean, the divorce rate's really high right now just because of the stressors of COVID. I mean, the divorce rate's out of control. And I think there's a lot of that happening. Now you got home church and Zoom church and everything's at home. And I think people are just getting to their nerves. But going back to what you said about feeling weird when you go into church, I think that, and this is just my personal opinion, but I think that the men, there's a little more of a skepticism on our part when we come in because because there's the assumption that the guy is always the bad guy. The guy was the cheater. The guy was the guy who was out, whoring around and
porn.
and yeah, he's always addicted to porn and all this stuff. And so you walk into the ward and you always get that, oh, Brother Hubbard, you're divorced.
Oh, yeah.
And then the other one is if the wife, like a lot of the guys are friendly and they're like, hey, let's go mountain biking, let's go do stuff. And you're like, yeah, that'd be great. And then all of a sudden they stop wanting to talk to you. And I know the reason why. It's because maybe the wife is like, I don't want him hanging out with a divorced guy or a single guy because maybe
might rub off on him.
Yeah, or he might think if they're already having marital problems, he might think, well, Corey's got the life, man. He's got a bachelor pad. He's dating all these women. And then they're like, no, you're not hanging out with Corey. So I've had friends that just whoop, disappeared, stopped calling, stopped hanging out, stopped asking me to go do things.
Well, that's
know,
And of
we
course,
were-
the
why
wife
I
would never talk to
joined.
me.
That's why I joined these Facebook groups in the beginning. It was just because all of my friends were married and I didn't fit as easily anymore into their plans. And so I just was looking for other females that were single that I could get to know and feel like I was a part of something because I was the only divorced individual in my whole ward. So I was like flying solo there. So,
Well,
you
and
know.
we were talking about this last night. We had a get together last night, and all of us were kind of talking about this, about how, when you're single, you kind of get left. You feel like you're all alone, right? Because you don't get included because you're not a family unit anymore. And one of the biggest struggles that as single adults with the church culture, the fact is we feel that we get left behind and we get no resources. It's not like your bishop calls you in and says, oh, hey, here's this singles group and here's their contact info and here's how you can get in touch with them, right? You don't get that. You don't get that lifeline. And so a lot of single adults after divorce, a couple things happen. They either go inactive or they trudge on through, or they try and find their way through it.
I think
But
that's the culture. I think that's the cultural commandment thing. I think that the singles are running into because of all these expectations and what people set the standard in these wards, and so they don't feel like they fit in. Like you said, they don't feel like they don't have a family. All the lessons are about eternal families and families are forever and this and that and marriage and marriage couples, and you're sitting in the back going, yeah, I don't have a family right now, and you're
And then
this
if you
question is
comment about your
irrelevant.
divorce, they look at you like, oh, don't talk about divorce. We don't talk about divorce because we never get divorced.
well, so I mean,
Taboo.
let's go to Utah. You look at Utah, right? You got singles wards in almost every
Yeah.
single stake. Okay, now you go
Up to 46, though. Up to 46. That's it.
That's true.
Right.
Me and Corey have capped out of that one. So
Yeah, I've been kicked out of those wards.
we're the old people.
So, I mean, you go to Texas or you go other places where the church isn't as strong, like up here in Washington, and you have one singles ward that's in Seattle, and it's a 40 to 50-minute drive to get there, right? And it's kind of like, I really don't feel like fighting traffic to go to a ward that
You have one that you can go to your age group? We only have like the young
41.
singles wards, like
I
for the
think
young.
there's 41. He can go till he's 46.
No, I mean, we only have the up to 35 group,
Oh, you only have that. Oh, yeah.
at least that I'm aware of.
No, we
yeah.
have in DC. We have the mid singles ward in DC, and it goes up to 46. So I got back from Mexico, and I was 48. 40. No, I'm sorry, I forget. I was almost 50, so I was like 49, almost 50.
Once you get as old as Corey, it all just kind of runs.
Yeah, it all blends together. You're like, what? How old am I again? Let me do some math here. Hold on.
I
Yeah.
know.
Have that like linchpin point. Was it pre-depends or after depends? I can't remember.
Yeah, exactly. It's like,
But that's just one of the biggest challenges as single adults that we face is we don't have that lifeline. I mean, the church, like you said, Corey, the church is so family oriented, so family driven and focused that they really don't have a program for those of us that are divorced and single. I mean, they don't have anything for divorce at all. I mean, I don't think you find it in any of the church programs or anything. When I went through after my divorce or during my divorce, I went through a divorce care group, and it was through a community Christian church, and they put on this divorce care program, and it was very insightful and very helpful, and kind of helped me get on the path to where I needed to go, and helped me to focus on how to handle things and get myself back on track. The church offered nothing like that. Like, I went to my bishop, I'm like, hey, do we have anything like this? And he's like, no. And I'm like, why not? Why are we, what happened to, leave the 99 sheep to go find that one?
It's because it's taboo. It's because
Well,
divorce is not looked upon in a good manner, no matter the situation. Like they just don't
It-
like
it-
to talk about
and,
it.
and that's where a lot of people end up leaving the church, is because they don't feel like they're welcomed or wanted.
Or they create their own version of a Mormon, like, right? Like they just be like, well, I'm Mormon, but I'm not that kind of Mormon. And they kind of just do their own thing.
Right. And that's a sad part. And that's one of the biggest challenges, is because we're left out here to fend for ourselves.
So
And
what
I'm
really
And that's the way. Yeah. Go ahead.
And that's that.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
That's really not what the Savior taught us. You know, he told us to leave the 99 and to go find that one. And the church is just focusing on that 99. Now, am I faulting the church? No. Should the single adults be speaking up more and pushing for a curriculum? Yeah, we probably should, because, you know, whose fault is it? If there's a problem, it needs to be addressed. And if we don't say anything about it, how's the church going to know that there's a problem?
You know, this kind of gets to that point where, you know, you run into, and I, just to kind of throw it out there, I feel the same way. Like if I didn't have a calling, that people would miss me because I'm not doing my calling, then I could literally just fade away and my ward would probably never even know. At some point, maybe 2 or 3 years down the road, when they change over positions and people are out going down the list of everybody on the roster, like, oh, maybe we should stop by and see if he's still there. You know, other than that, they'd be like, ah, whatever, we don't even care. That's just kind of, especially with COVID, it's become extremely easy to get lost in the cracks. So
the church has become extremely hands off with it, is what's happening.
Well, people don't know how to act. They don't know how to act around us. And that's the problem is, you know, to break down those traditions, you have to almost embarrass people or shame them into change. It reminds me of 2 examples. The first example, I read an article where, you know, there was an older couple in Utah sitting in line waiting for food, you know, what, Chick-fil-A or one of those places, and there was a woman a young woman standing in line in front of them holding her Book of Mormon, and she had a tank top on and she had sleeve tattoos. And the old couple made a comment about her tattoos and about how she probably should have been reading those scriptures that she's holding, you know, sooner, before she got those tattoos. And the girl turned around and said, I'm really sorry, but I got these tattoos before I got baptized a year ago. And that was kind of like, oh, embarrassing moment right there, right? Because it's like, oh, okay, I see the point. You're a convert. Members forget, hey, we're a church of converts. And then the second example was one of the guys I worked with in Mexico said, when he was in Indiana, one of his deacons came over and said, hey, there's a guy sitting over in the pew over there, and he smells like cigarettes. And he looked at the kid and he goes, I wonder what your sins smell like. And the kid was like, oh, like it just shocked him into like, wow, you're right. I'm a total hypocrite.
It's interesting because it's funny that people would give the benefit of the doubt to somebody who's a convert, but yet if it would have been a lifelong member that had a tattoo, they would like shun them in a way. And I just have to wonder, just like you were saying, it's kind of like, yes, it's been counseled, right? But so has having a year's supply of food. Do we go around and judge everybody if they don't have their year's supply of food? Like, are we that judgmental?
I
Like,
am.
I just think
I judge everybody.
we already know that, but everybody else.
Forget it. Total apostle.
Just because, I mean, it's a counsel, it's a, you know, like, okay, you know, you don't want to tattoo your body, but there's a lot of counsel that's given, and a lot of it is not visual. You know, we don't see it. We don't know what people have stored away for food, right? And so I just think it's just a sad scenario where people would choose to go down that route.
Those people who are most willing to judge are those people who are probably avoiding their own judgments themselves. So it's easy to look at somebody else and say, gosh, look at all their problems, and I'm going to avoid mine. I know this for a fact, like there is in my ward in particular, one lady who, I know this because people have told me, like, this person goes and talks about you when she even goes like visiting teaching. And I'm just like, you know, there comes a point where I'm like, okay, this is ridiculous. But every time I see her in church, she's always super nice and putting on that grin. And I just think, I really know what you're all about, but I'm not going to say anything because that's really your battle to fight, not mine. I don't care what you think about me because I know the things that she said and I know they're not true. And the funny thing is the people that she tries to say that to also know that they're not true. And so really, she's just making herself look bad. But I feel kind of sad for this person because I know she's got lots of struggles. And I know I've seen like some of the personal struggles that she has in other like situations that I don't want to really mention, but it's so much easier for her to find fault with others. And to be fair, I'm not the only one she talked about. I mean, I'm saying this for myself because I'm the one talking, but I know that she kind of talks about other people in the ward as well. And I feel sad for her because this is the type of thing that happens. And when you start to look at, I mean, we've talked about this on this program several times of this whole notion of like a Mormon 2.0. And I think there's probably a lot of people that have heard of that, but maybe aren't quite familiar with that. Have you heard of that term before, Garrett?
No.
So let me just kind of read this here. So this got coined. It's kind of a Utah thing that's sort of been popping up, right? And you've heard of the Real Housewives of Salt Lake City or Salt Lake or whatever they call it, right? And so the Mormon 2.0s, as they call themselves, are people who they kind of want to live the church their own way, right? Like maybe they've been hurt, maybe they've been judged, maybe they've kind of done these things or gone through a divorce, whatever the case may be. But then they're kind of running into a situation where they're like, yeah, I don't want to live all the standards. I just kind of want to like pick and choose what I want to live, right? And so it kind of becomes a situation where are we becoming judgmental for somebody who is a Mormon 2.0, so to speak? Or do we just draw a line in the sand for ourselves and say, okay, that's fine if you want to do that, but this is not how Christ, like, this is not the church that Christ established, right? You can't just pick and choose from the commandments. He's like, look, I want you to bring your will into alignment with mine. So where do we draw that line then from saying this is something that's important to me versus, okay, wait a minute, I feel judged, right? I feel like somebody's calling me out on something. If I have a tattoo or something, right? I mean, I get what people are saying of, I don't want to be judged. But at the same time, where do we kind of keep pushing those limits until we become one of these quote unquote Mormon 2.0s? Let me just read this real quick because it's something. So Lisa Barlow, I guess her name is, of Real Housewives of Salt Lake City or Salt Lake or whatever it is. She said that she has an untraditional way to practice the faith. It's to be authentic to yourself and take from the religion what resonates with you and what's good for you and your family, because maybe not everything is good for you and your family. Now, I get that, right? Like maybe it's not always a good thing to have somebody sit there and tell you, you have to shave your beard or you can't be in a bishopric, or, you know, I don't want like, you know, tattoos or something like that. That might be their personal preference that they're kind of projecting onto you. But at the same time, you run into this scary scenario where we could be creating Mormon 2.0s where they're just like, well, I don't want anyone to tell me what to do. And so therefore, I'm going to live the religion my way. And that's a slippery slope, right? I remember, for example, Elder Oaks gave that talk, 3-4 years ago, where he was basically like, we believe in traditional marriage. And there was this big backlash from people who were saying, I don't agree with that. I can't believe he said that. This is not what I teach my children. And my first thought is, what the crap are you teaching your children then? Because exactly. This is the proclamation of the family. This is not going to change. You can't pressure God into having it your way. Heavenly Father wants us to bring it into his will, not our will onto his, right? We don't project ourselves onto the commandments. So where do we draw that line? Where do we stop and say, okay, yeah, some of this is cultural commandment, but some of this is also like stuff I got to do.
So this is kind of my take on this because I think it all comes down to we just worry about ourselves. Like when I teach my children, I teach them what I believe the church standards are and what we have as standards within our home. And then I follow those standards and adhere to those standards. Now I try to help them see that this is for us. We are going to follow what the Lord has taught us. We are going to do what he has counseled via his prophets and leaders of the church, what's in the scriptures, things like that. But if someone chooses not to, that's their choice. We're all on our own paths. They can do what we want. We've been commanded to love them no matter what. So we've been commanded to follow the commandments. As a parent, I've been commanded to teach my children. And as a, a member, I've been commanded to love those around me. It doesn't say that I could tell them how to live their lives. Now, of course, church leaders have to create rules and keep them going strong. But as an individual member in the church, I'm responsible for myself, for what I teach my children, and for loving those around me, despite what their choices are. If they want to become a 2.0 member, okay, great. I got a lot of people in my family that are like that. I love them. I care for them. They're great people. But I tell you what, if I turn my back on them and judge them, there's no way they'd ever become more of a 1.0. They will become maybe a 3.0 or whatever. And so if I follow the commandment I've been given, which is to love them where they're at and for who they are, maybe they'll come back. Maybe not, but that's their choice. But I can promise you, if I sit here in judgment and point at them, there's a higher chance they will not return. So that's my view on it.
Well, and who are we to sit here and say that, oh, yeah, I'll follow this and I'll follow that and I'll do this and do that? I mean, if we follow all the simple, easy stuff, which knowing kids today, I mean, they're going to take the easy way, right? Where are we going to see those blessings? I mean, the blessings don't come from taking the easy way out, right? You don't, right? It's by being obedient to the standards and the commandments that have been given to us will we inherit eternal life in the celestial kingdom. It's not by picking and choosing. It's not by picking and choosing, right? The Lord didn't say, oh, yeah, here you go. Here's a list of commandments. You can pick out whatever ones you want and whatever ones you don't want. And, oh, no. Here's a list of commandments to follow. Here's a list of vows and everything else to follow when we go through the temple.
It's not hard. It's not hard. The Temple Recommend interview tells you exactly how you have to live. It's not a hard process. The questions aren't hard to answer. And I've been reading a lot about, like, we've been studying the Book of Mormon last year and then Doctrine and Covenants this year. And one thing I really noticed is that how the Book of Mormon was really assembled like a survival manual for our day. It really is. And when you read the examples of how the civilizations fell, it was all because they allowed antichrist doctrine, antichrist groups to enter in with their priestcrafts and influence the people to fall away from the church. And that's happening exactly today. When people are saying things like, I cannot believe that he said that about families, or hate speech, or using all these priestcraft buzzwords like hate speech and bigotry and racism and all these little, I call them priestcrafts because they work like a voodoo on you and cause you to fear and run away and self-evaluate like, oh, am I really a bigot? And it's not true. And if you look at Lehi's vision, we're being mocked. We're at the tree. We've partaken of the fruit, and we're being mocked from the great and spacious building with the people with their fine clothes. And they're mocking us for our beliefs. And like it said in Lehi's vision, there were people who took the fruit and then left and then fell away. And because they're being influenced by the world. These 2.0ers are the people who have taken the fruit and they're starting to walk away.
Right. And you can't do that because when you start picking and choosing, that's when everything starts falling apart. We're seeing it in today's society. We've seen the family structure attacked relentlessly. We've seen marriage attacked relentlessly. And we see people like, oh, why get married? It's just a piece of paper, right? And then we see these family structures just crumble. And what people don't realize is that there's a reason why these commandments and why these things have been put in place, because without them, it's going to fall apart.
Right.
And we are seeing it happen at an accelerated rate.
Well, right. It's the end is coming. You know, the Lord is sifting his own. He's putting things in place to see who's going to stay firm and who's not. But at the same time, again, it's just for us to deal with ourselves. We've got to decide what we're going to do. Other people may choose differently. We can try to encourage them or be good examples to them, but we're all on different paths, and we just got to decide for ourselves. And like I think about the 2.0ers, if you compare them to the mainstream world, they're still doing pretty good, right? Maybe they're not quite where they need to be. Maybe they're struggling on certain things, but I don't know. I think at least they're close, right? They
Right,
might
and
have
that's-
two
You're
steps
right.
away,
That's
but they might come back. But if we push them, they won't. So it's
Oh no, you still have to love
put our
them.
arms to these people.
I think we need to be careful not to lump them in with somebody who's necessarily just less active. Because I wouldn't say a Mormon 2.0 is less active. These are people who consider themselves active, but want to live church and the gospel their way. It's like Burger King, right? They're going to have it their way. So for somebody like for us, when we're divorced and we're going through and we're trying to find our path in all of this mess, you know, you can't just kind of say, well, I'm going to halfway live the commandments. I've seen a lot of people who do that. You know, that basically means you're willing to do it your way, which is not Christ's way. So when it comes to the point of having the gospel and having our firm foundation, we have to accept everybody. We have to love everybody, but we don't have to cave in on the doctrines, right? Like we go back to Elder Oaks talk. Elder Oaks gave a fairly straightforward talk. This is what we believe.
Yep.
And other people were upset about that. Like, no, I should be able to believe the way I want. Like, well, you can believe whatever you want, but that's not the teachings of the church.
Right.
Well, and here's a one way to look at it. You know, Everett, did you have to buy your first car, or was it given to you?
I just stole it. I'm
Well,
kidding.
I kind of figured.
I was
you
a
work for your
3.0 at the time.
right? Did you work your? I mean, I'm sure you worked to get your first car, right?
Yeah.
Right, and you took immaculate care of that car, right? You
No.
worked even harder to keep it looking.
No.
Sure.
I mean, well, let's pretend for your analogy I did. Okay.
Okay.
We'll
So
say
for
yes.
those of us, I mean, in general, if you work hard for something, right, you want to take good care of it, right? I mean, you're gonna do everything you can to ensure that nothing happens to it because it means so much to you, right? Whereas if you're just given a car, it's just going to be a beaten pile of trash before you're even done with it.
I think,
And
yes,
I-
sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes.
Well, I mean, and it depends on the person. But if we sit here and we work hard because we have our eyes on the prize, our eternal salvation and the end game, right? And we work hard for it, I think we're going to do everything we can to make sure that we achieve that dream. And we're not just going to sit there and go, whatever. So it really comes down to is what is that person's end game? What do they want to get out of this? Are they willing to put in the work? Are they willing to suffer the persecution? Because, I mean, remember, we are a peculiar people. You take us, you take the LDS Church and you put it against, you know, the Jehovah Witnesses, Methodists, Catholics, whatever, and we do have things that set us apart. And there's a reason for that because of our beliefs and because of what we believe is in store for us by going and doing what we are taught.
Right.
If we sit
Yeah,
here
go
and
back to
pick and choose and all that, it may not be the gift you want to receive at the end. You know, through the hard work and the trials, do we receive those blessings? And if we take the easy way out, it's not going to mean as much. And
Well, I think
if you concede on one aspect, how easy is it going to be for the adversary to get you to concede on other aspects of that? I mean, there was a story that I heard once a long time ago where a man walks into a pawn shop and he's got all these power tools all throughout this pawn shop, right? Really nice power tools. And they've got the price tags on them. And at the back of this pawn shop is a glass case with a rusted old beat up wedge. And it's got a price tag that you would not believe. And the man looks at the wedge and he looks at it and he looks at the store owner and goes, help me understand something. He's like, I'm in this store of yours. And I see all these power tools, really nice power tools with these price tags. Yet you've got this beat up wedge sitting in this glass case with this atrocious price tag hanging on it. Help me understand. And the adversary looks at the man and goes, I'll tell you why. He's like, I can have all these power tools all I want. And sure, they can do some damage. But he's like, I can take this wedge. And all I need is the smallest chip. And I can set that wedge in there and split a person wide open. That's all he needs. He just needs us to concede on one little aspect, one little part of that culture, and he can start chipping away in other places.
Yeah, I think to clarify, like kind of what I was saying in terms of like the antichrist doctrine, I'm referring mostly to what I see in the church. There are people who buy into like the far left woke doctrines of like, there's 96 different genders. There's, the whole, there's a lot of those like far left kind of stuff that is very controversial and very against the church doctrines. And I think that it really messes with people's heads. I remember being in a Sunday school meeting and we were talking about Corinthians, and then the word patriarch came up in one of the verses. And this college student that was in there, single girl, she was all about like the patriarchy and, masculinity and toxic masculinity. And she kind of went off on this like tangent that had nothing to do with the scripture. And it was this far left kind of doctrine that I think is what it's causing a lot of tension in the church, because people are buying into this worldly doctrine, man-made doctrine, and it's not jiving with some of the principles of the gospel in terms of like the proclamation of the family, and the church's stance on same-sex couples who have kids and then they want to be baptized, those kinds of things. It's how does that jive with your politics when your ideology doesn't mesh with Christ's doctrines? It's interesting.
We're getting what's the word I'm looking for? We're getting the gospel of man mixed in with the doctrine, and it's becoming very corrupt. And yes, politics is playing a very strong role in that, and it's sad to see that.
Though, right? Not as the gospel. The gospel is still pure.
Well, yeah, the culture.
Simple.
Yeah.
Lives.
It's simple.
Yeah.
The gospel is simple.
It is, and it's being misconstrued, and the adversaries.
What Everett was saying. It's what Everett was saying. We want to impose our will on God. We want to say, God, you should change your opinion about a husband and a wife, or you should change your opinion about the binary genders of a male and a female. There should be like 70 genders. Or whatever person feels like. I think people are pushing their own worldly agendas and trying to say God needs to change. God needs to get with the times. And I just don't see how that jives.
Well, that kind of conflicts with God being the same yesterday, today, and forever. God can't change, because the moment he does, he ceases to be God. It says that in the scriptures.
Change
Now,
like certain aspects, just not the core of the gospel, right? Things can change and things can progress in certain areas. Some things are unchangeable, obviously, but I do want to, just in case I came across incorrectly on this or came across wrong, I'm not saying that the church in any way needs to change their stance to line up with the 2.0ers or non-members or whatever. that's not at all what I was saying. I think that we as individuals, all of us have to decide, are we going to side with what the church's stance are or stances? Or are we going to choose to take a different route? But that's up to us, and that's up to us to what we teach our children, and that's up to us on how we want to manage that. But it's also been commanded that we love those who choose not to. It doesn't mean we change our stance. It doesn't mean that the church has to change their views on things, but we do have to love those who feel that maybe we should or they should. There was this situation that came up years ago, probably like 6 or 7 years ago, and there was a TV show where it was gay men that were married to women. I think most of them were members of the church, I think, and they were living in these marriages, even though they were sexually attracted to men. And I was at this book club. It was an LDS book club, and this topic came up. And this one lady worked at a coffee shop, and she was LDS, but she was saying that the owner of her coffee shop was lesbian. So the lesbian lady came to her and was like, "Hey, how do you feel about this? Because these are members of your church, gay guys living in these, marriages with a wife and kids. What's your take?" And together, collectively, they decided that these individuals didn't belong because the lesbian didn't want them in their group, because they didn't want them in the gay group because they were married. And this other individual didn't want them in the LDS group because they were gay. And so it was really just one of those moments where in my head I thought, then where do they belong? And I can promise you, even if they are, whoever, even if they weren't trying to live a straight life or whatever, like Christ would want us to embrace those individuals more than anything. Doesn't mean we change our standards and our beliefs. Doesn't mean we expect the church to change their standards or the gospel to change, but we ourselves are commanded to love them. And I was kind of heartbroken because I thought this individual was very active in the church, was like, "We don't want them." And I'm like, why would you not want them? Why are we not opening our arms to everybody despite what they're struggling with? Like that's just
You
where I'm
should.
at. I just feel like we just need
Yeah.
to love everyone.
Well, there was
Doesn't
a
mean we have
ward
to
in
love
LA.
us or change the gospel, but to love them.
Yeah, there was a ward in LA that was down close to West Hollywood, and they were members of the church that were struggling with homosexuality, but they were active. They were living the law of chastity like we have to live the law of chastity, and they would get up and bear their testimony and say openly that yes, I struggle with these same-sex feelings, and but it's a struggle, and the Lord's blessing me and keeping me strong, and they were attending church just fine. And and I think you're right, Celeste. I think everybody's welcome. Every single person is welcome, no matter what their background or what they're struggling with. Like I said, what do your sins smell like?
Right.
So I it's like it's just everybody's welcome. Anybody can walk in the building and attend church. So
And they
I think
should feel
what I'm worried about is like the political doctrines out there that are infecting. I remember Prop 8 in California, where we were going to pass a law that was made state law that marriage was between a man and a woman. And they were members of the church, prominent members of the church. I mean, I remember, there were members of the church that were really struggling with Prop 8 and supporting Prop 8, even though the church was saying you need to get out and vote and campaign and put yard signs out. And even Steve Young, living in California, former quarterback of the San Francisco 49ers, came out strong against, the church's push on Prop 8. He was against Prop 8, even though he's a Latter-day Saint. So it's
Right.
tough. It's really tough,
It is. And the interesting, because I took a class a while back and it had this topic in it about the Prop 8. And it went on to explain that the reason that that the church opted to go against something like that, because normally we don't get into political battles, is because they foresaw that it would actually challenge religious freedom in the long run. And so
I think they were worried that they were going to say, hey, these two guys who are Latter-day Saints and they have temple recommends, they want to get married in the temple.
Right, exactly.
An issue.
So it was religious freedom. They wouldn't have, in the end, they wouldn't have been able to say who could and couldn't get sealed or married or however they wanted to phrase it. And so they took such a strong stance because it was more of a religious freedom, not so much anti-gay stance.
Yeah.
Whereas a lot of people took it as an anti-gay stance. So
No, it was just because they were going to force churches to perform gay weddings, and the church was like, well, wait a
yeah, it was a
minute, at
religious
what point is
freedom
that going to leak
yeah.
into
Well,
these
it
guys
all
might
came
get married in the temple?
it all came down that it was the church's legal department is what it had to go through. That was their biggest hangup, was the legal aspects of it. So, kind of like what you were saying earlier, Celeste, is with temples. It was just all, and that it was just a big legal battle is what it was. So, I mean, it all just, like Dave said, it was all the wording that they had to go through and to make sure that that was protected.
Right.
Yeah. But those are the things I think that the church is struggling with. I think when you allow worldly stuff in, you allow the world's doctrines to come into your life, and it conflicts with your religious beliefs. I think that's what we're kind of talking about a little bit here, in addition to the cultural stuff too.
Right. That is another cultural challenge with the church, and eventually that will have to be addressed. When, we don't know, but we do know that it will have to be addressed.
So, I mean,
Well,
this is kind of an interesting topic. I mean, there's a comment in the audience that some think the church will eventually have to allow gays to be sealed in the temple. And, this is sort
Not
of
gonna
where
happen.
things are going, where people will push that and say it's homophobia or, some sort of ism.
It's strictly, I mean, look at the proclamation of the world, the proclamation on the family. Look, it says right in the scriptures, it is very black and white in the scriptures of what marriage is defined as. So, I mean, this is a very touchy subject, and I don't want to get caught in the middle of it. But I will say that, at some point it will have to be addressed, and that will be a interesting time to see what church leadership does.
I think that it's already being prepared, that even with just the recent changes, as David had stated in the chat, is that at some future date, the church will probably not be doing marriages. They'll probably just be doing sealings because of the legal aspects that come along with that. And again, I don't think the church needs to change their stance. I think that we need to, support them and things like that. But the church is going to have to make some adjustment because legalities will try to override them with the culture. So, yeah.
As a side note, I think it's very interesting when you look at a situation where there's two apostles that are called in the same conference or something like that, because I've always been curious why they sort of put some ahead of others in seniority, right? But you look at our current situation, and Elder Oaks and President Nelson were called in the same conference. And I have always thought it very interesting that President Nelson was put before Elder Oaks. And when you start to look at the pandemic and the situation we're in now, I mean, this is maybe a little bit of a tangent, but you look at the situation we're in now, medically speaking, it's kind of almost like comforting in a way to have somebody at the head of the church that to one degree or another has some sort of medical background that can help put in place some sort of protocols and have things that like make it, safe for people to be back in church. He can kind of lead us through this point. And I do believe, like we're talking about, that legally the church they're on borrowed time when it comes to needing to address these issues from a legal standpoint, because the world is pushing further and further. And once President Nelson's job, whatever the Lord deems that may be, is done and maybe moves us past this, then Elder Oaks, who has that strong legal background, will be next in line. So to me, I've always kind of looked at it like, very interesting how this all kind of fits together. But I agree. I don't think the church can forever just continue the status quo. And I find it interesting and a bit sad that there are those in the church who are like, well, we need to push it to meet the world standards. No, our whole goal in this life has been to stand above the world, to kind of be that example and that light shining on the hill, right? We are commanded to be different and above all of these things.
commanded to be in the world and not of the world.
Exactly. And so, it's a sad situation that I see, the 2.0ers. Celeste is 100% right. We've got to love them with all of our hearts. But we also have to be aware that we can't pick and choose the commandments, and we're not here to push the Lord or the church into following what we believe is now we're more sophisticated. We have science, or we have this or whatever. This is where we start to go down that slippery slope of we're injecting our will onto God's and not accepting his will as our own. So
following in the same pattern as the Book of Mormon. I mean, they got rich, they got fancy clothes, and eventually what did they do? They fell away from the church. I mean, we're in that stage. I mean, we are the richest worldwide. People are the richest they've ever been in the history of the world. And people are comfortable, and we're getting to the point where we are starting to change our attitudes as a people. Not the church is still going to remain the same. But if you look at the Book of Mormon, every single time they got prideful, and prideful is when you say God needs to change. That's being prideful. When you say, "Hey, God really needs to consider these, these woke attitudes," and that's where we start falling away.
And I don't think there's anything wrong with bringing things to the Lord, like for the leaders of the church. Like, hey, you like how
No.
women can now, stand as, I can't think of the word, like at baptisms, they can watch and make sure everything goes under the right. So I think that it's okay to bring things to the Lord and ask him. I think it's important to actually, because he sometimes doesn't give us direction unless we're asking. But we have to be willing to accept whatever the Lord's answer is.
Yeah.
Which would be accepting whatever the leaders are telling us.
So we've got a lot of people in the audience that have a lot of things they want to kind of add, and we would like to kind of open it up to bring in people one at a time that may want to ask a question or make a point. Please, we ask you be respectful, but before we allow anybody in, we're not just going to allow anybody willy-nilly. Well, see, now Corey's just allowed himself twice. I don't know how that.
Corey's over there raising his hand.
Right. Please raise your hand and we will call you one at a time to kind of come on. And either if you don't feel comfortable being on camera, totally okay. Just go ahead and ask the question however you'd like to do it. So, but please raise your hand. Corey's got his instructions he always posts in there. I think it's like Alt-7. Is that it? Okay. Alt-7.
No, it's
It's option 7.
Alt plus. Sorry.
Or Alt option 7. What is it?
Alt plus Y.
Alt.
Sorry, I bumped the 7 instead of the Y.
Okay, Alt Y to raise your hand if you got a question. Okay.
What about for Apple people? Option.
Oh, I don't share that anymore. You
Yeah, you
crazy
do.
Apple people.
Whatever.
If you've got an Apple,
I'll get you the Apple one.
In the audience, I'm sorry. Don't pass
Whatever.
go. Don't collect $200. You lose.
Just a bunch of haters up here.
That's right. Okay, so we've got.
Tom has. Oh, who's going to take charge of the questions? Who's
Go
gonna
ahead.
Do it.
Go ahead.
You want me to? Okay. Go ahead, Bassam. You're up, buddy.
All right. Hey, nice to meet you, Garrett. That was really a good interaction, good discussion. And I was just going to say that I have met Michael Jordan's mother. I had the opportunity of hosting her about maybe 15 years ago when I worked for another company. And then we invited her over as a speaker. And she is one awesome lady, very humble, very sweet. And I actually met her and her daughter. They gave me a book.
Right on.
Very cool. Nice.
Her name is Dolores. Oh, by the way, I don't know if you see that.
Look how tall he
Yes.
is compared to the rest of his family.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
tall.
Compared to his mom, like when we first met his mom, I was like, "You're Michael Jordan's mom? How the heck?"
Little.
Exactly. But she's awesome. I mean, she's like down to earth. I met his sister as well, and we hosted them in a cabin in Utah in Sundance. I used to work for Utah company at the time, so that was a fun time. But I just wanted to also add, and this is just a comment, not a question, but Celeste did make a comment about things are changing, and Heavenly Father is reacting to the changes as well. He may not change in the way he is, as we've noted, but that's why we have prophets, and the prophets are there to sort of guide us and to see the circumstances of the day and make adjustments and so forth. So just keep that in mind. There's going to be even more difficult times coming, and we're just going to adapt, and that's why we have prophets, and that's all I was going to say. So nice meeting you guys.
Thanks.
All right.
Nice to meet you.
Bet you.
Is there anybody else who wants to say something?
I think we had a couple hands pop up.
I just don't see him. Do you see him? Maybe they went back down.
Oh, there's one.
Oh, I don't see it. Where is it?
Stephanie.
Oh,
Stephanie.
Stephanie Gonzalez.
Okay, I'm just gonna go ahead and unmute. So
Okay.
it seems so I'm just not gonna go on video because right now I'm not looking fast.
No, it's so
That's
fine.
okay,
I
no
understand.
worries.
You got it.
So I think so I'm not sure if what you guys are referring to as in the change in culture in regards to leadership, or what are you referring to culture in regards to following the commandments?
So I think pretty much both. When you're talking about following the commandments, when we talk about the 2.0s, for example, their push is to change the culture in the church in a way that's kind of meeting the standards of the world. So for example, you see these groups that want to have same-sex marriages allowed at church and normalized. And that's kind of flying in the face of the proclamation of the family. It's just not going to happen. So what they want to do is take the culture that we are experiencing now, as far as, what the world is saying is acceptable, and saying, okay, the church needs to also accept this. They need to get with the times. They need to go ahead and allow this as well. So that's kind of what we're talking about.
Okay, but wouldn't church culture also be what's how leadership has been handled, especially locally as well, because that could also affect the way people serve their missions, the way people have an interpretation of what the principles of the church are.
Mhm.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that we had kind of talked about that towards the beginning, where you've got leaders who say you can have a beard and some that say you can't, and some that get really particular. If you've got a tattoo, maybe they would say, I don't want you passing the sacrament, for example, things like that. So you've
Or you
got
have to
that,
wear a white shirt to church, instead of a blue
Yeah,
shirt.
and
right?
those are the
I
times.
mean, see,
I think-
I mean it in the sense like where you have certain people who end up serving as in a specific calling, a certain group of people who end up running the church versus the people who don't run the church because they're not they're not befriending the group that's dominating the church. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah,
So
you're
you kind
seeing
of
that sometimes within the wards or even stakes, there's groups of people that might be maybe like in a clique or something like that, where they kind of feel like they are the ones running the church. I know that this is the thing, like people in the church are imperfect, and every leader in the church is imperfect. And, as you get down to bishop level and stuff, like they're just normal people trying to do the best they can. And I've had some bishops that have been really challenging. But it's those moments when we have to realize that we can choose to be obedient, despite if we agree 100% with what they're saying. If it's something really that we really disagree with, we can take it to the next step, which would be the stake president or even higher if we need to. But yeah, they're imperfect. So sometimes their rules might not be per se what should be, but it gets touchy. I don't know, it's hard because I think the Lord still wants us to be obedient, unless it's something that is extremely challenging.
I mean from my experience, I've always felt the places that I've been in, I know that we're not perfect and that it's always a learning experience, but sometimes the people that have the callings don't, and it instead of helping others, they end up harming themselves, and the people that that they're serving because of the way that they develop those skills.
Mhm.
And so, if from my experience, that's the whole reason why I'm kind of skeptical about, joining, Zoom or things like that from church, because I haven't had the best experience, but I do know that, the church is true.
Mhm.
And so when 2020 came and I had to, join Zoom for church, I was like, I don't have no obligation to do it because I don't feel like I'm part of the group. I never felt like I was part of the group.
Right. Yeah, I learned through a very difficult experience once in a ward that I learned the reason why I went to church. And I can promise you, in that particular situation, in that particular ward, most people didn't want me there. And but I went anyway because I had done a lot of praying, and I realized again that these people are imperfect and they're gonna have false views, possibly about me. But I knew that the Lord knew the truth, and I knew that I knew the truth. And I knew that he still expected me to follow the commandments he's given me. And so it was hard, really, really, really hard to go to church, but I did because I knew I was going for me and I was going for my family. And more important, I was going to follow the commandment that the Lord had given me. Now, granted, it was tough, really tough. And those situations I think occur probably more than we would want to admit. So
Yeah, I feel like those type of situations need more exposure, because I've seen that I read the unsigned and stories like that. I've never really read stories that talk about that,
right,
and that needs to be exposed a little bit more,
right.
because maybe that could be the reason why,
Yeah.
I mean, maybe that could be one of the reasons why so many church members are leaving the gospel, even though they have other reasons. But then, it could be one of the reasons that they choose not to come back.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I have said many times that if I would have had a fraction of less faith than I had, that I probably would have stopped going. Um, yeah, absolutely. I agree. I think that it's important to teach that people are,
And overall, just I feel like maybe the church leadership needs to do a lot more, because I know we do have leadership manuals, guidebooks, but it doesn't really go into detail on how people should be prepared for specific roles, especially the ones where they're dealing with a group of people like children and teenagers, because they're at a developmental stage where it's just a lot more difficult.
Mhm.
So it's just and then a lot of things could go wrong with that type of group. And I've seen the resources, but the resources are not enough. It's just the way they're written, they're very like open to interpretation, and not everyone has a leadership background to deal with those type of situations.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a tough one. It's a tough one. I think if we just each take it to the Lord on our own individual basis, that's about the best we can do. But it is a tough topic for sure. Absolutely.
I just wanted to say that.
Yes. So thank you,
Thanks,
Stephanie, for
Stephanie,
coming
and
on. We
keep
appreciate your contribution.
keep watching the podcasts, and and keep interacting with the groups, because this is going to be your community when you feel like you don't have one. So
A lot of support here. Absolutely, Stephanie.
Thank you so much for listening to me. I'll
You
mute
are so
myself.
welcome.
All
Kelly
right.
go
Thanks,
first.
Kelly.
Kelly Bailey, you are next. Come on up.
Okay, I was just gonna say I joined the church when I was 20, last millennium, long time ago, and
Last year, right?
yeah, exactly.
Right.
I was so busy looking around at all of the people around, trying to. I can't start my video, sorry, because I'm driving and it's dark and you wouldn't be able to see me.
Oh, don't
You'll be
crash
fine.
your car.
Yeah. Anyway, but anyway, so I was so busy looking around at how do you do this? How are you supposed to be a member of the church? trying to dot my I's and cross my T's. So crazy, just like losing the spirit of somebody giving their saying a prayer because they said you instead of thee. And I'm not judging them, but I'm thinking, I can't get past this in my head. And I went so many years without really feeling the spirit because I was so focused on the culture, and I think of it now as being a Pharisee, just being so focused on you only do this on Sunday, you have to do this, you can't do that, to be a good member of the church. And I think, and I totally love what Celeste has been saying about it being an individual thing. And I mean, not so far as the 2.0 people you're talking about, but so many things that we focus on our neighbors doing or our neighbors not doing. Oh, they're on Sunday, or whatever. We do not need to be looking at those people. We need to be looking at our families. And we also don't need to say to everybody else, oh, well, my kids play soccer on Sunday, so I think it's okay, because that's us. That's what we do. That's not some, oh, well, we watch R-rated movies. We don't see a problem with it. It's nobody's business what you do in your home. It's nobody's business. And I think that a lot of times when we say things like, oh, well, I don't drink Coca-Cola, caffeinated soda, it comes across as us telling other people, well, you shouldn't either, so I just think we really need to be real careful about the things that we do and don't do and how we come across to other people about those things. I said in the chat that it comes down to, your temple recommend interview, and that's really the bottom line. I mean, if you can answer all those questions the way that they need to be answered for you to go into the temple, then you're doing a great job. And there's no question about, do you have a tattoo? Well, did you get it before you joined the church? Or wait a minute, were you inactive? And I just see so many people get caught up. My son has a tattoo and he's ashamed of it. And it breaks my heart. He was inactive. He doesn't try to use that as he doesn't tell everybody, oh, well, I got that tattoo while I was inactive. He's just flat ashamed of it, and it breaks my heart. It's just part of his history. And
tell him it's like a scar. He fell down and has a scar on his forehead.
It is. It's a scar.
It's just a scar.
Well, and the thing is, it's part of his history. It's part of his life, and I hate for him to be ashamed about anything that he's done because it brought him to where he is today. So anyway, I'll stop. That's my soapbox.
Oh, thank you, Kelly.
Thanks,
I
Kelly.
couldn't agree more, though.
That was great. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right. Next, we have Tom.
No,
Tom.
don't bring Tom on. Not Tom.
Come on, buddy.
Oh, sounds like Tom's going to grill Garrett.
Oh, geez. Here we go, Tom.
So, no, we're talking about culture and stuff. And I was talking to a friend of mine a couple of days ago because I'm visiting my brother here in Utah right now. And it was funny that the friend got the tour with Sharon Eubanks of the church building, and they asked Sharon, like, what's the biggest concern of the church leadership? And Sharon Eubanks said the Wasatch Front, the Salt Lake area between Provo and Salt Lake has the worst issues within the church, and it's all about the culture stuff that we've been talking about. So I just thought it was funny that today's cast was talking about that. But it's just something like Garrett, and for the rest of the panel there, it's like what how do we change that, right? How do we be examples for people? I know it's tough, we can just do our best, but how do we try to change that so it's not such a big concern and a big issue for us?
Do you live in
I
Utah?
think we have to be.
I live in Seattle near Garrett.
All right.
Yeah. So I think for us, the challenge, I think, is just being willing to stand up if we see it happening. Like if we see somebody being judgmental or making a comment, maybe it's not to the person they're making the comment, but maybe behind the scenes, then do like my friend did and just kind of that. You don't have to be as snarky as he was about like, your sin, what do your sins smell like? But you can say things like, that's his business, or we welcome all people here. It shouldn't matter if they came in an army jacket and a t-shirt and some boots on because that's what they have. Like it shouldn't matter what they look like or what they dress like. It shouldn't matter if they get up and say and bear their testimony and don't say in the name of Jesus Christ. They just go amen and sit down. We don't know if they're guests. I mean, I live in Virginia. We've had people who were visitors on a fast and testimony meeting, and they got up and bore their testimony. And at the end, they were like, "Oh, amen." And they just sat down and we all went, "Amen." And we were so excited that they bore their testimony. And that's the attitude I think we have to bring, and be willing to just correct people in a loving manner. But speaking of what you said about the that valley, the Salt Lake Valley, it reminds me of what Brigham Young said. So he was overlooking the valley at one point, and he had a vision of the valley in the future. And somebody said, "Hey, why do you have such a weird look on your face?" And he says, "I'm looking over this valley," and he says, "I fear that the people of the church in this valley will get so rich that they will kick themselves out of the church." That's what Brigham Young had said. That was his worry looking at that valley.
This is interesting because I was raised in Utah. And so once I became active in the church, I was submerged in the Utah culture, or in the church culture, because guess what? It's not just in Utah, people, it's everywhere, but it is very much dominant there because there's so many members. But this is my take. Like, there are so many good people in Utah. And even those who are stuck in that culture, they are good people, but it's hard to break away from a culture. Every one of you guys, wherever you live, there's a culture among you. And so it's hard to break away from something you're raised in. And so I try not to be too judgmental of them, because I used to be there, moving away from Utah and seeing the differences among just normal different societies and stuff. And doing a lot of prayer and research on my own. I've come to see a lot of the cultural commandments that I thought were real, legitimate things we should be doing, that aren't. And so I think it's just in those moments, like I tend to be the one during Relief Society or gospel doctrine that they bring up a topic, and I think this is total cultural. I will be the one that stands up and say, "Hey, this doesn't work for me." And there was one time they were teaching about how you can't let your kids, you shouldn't let your kids have non-member friends, or you shouldn't let your kids around people that might be doing things that are different than what we would have them do, like they wear inappropriate clothing or they wear two-piece swimsuits, whatever. Like, they were having this big discussion, and it hit home. I was that inactive girl. I was the one that was doing a lot of things I didn't know I shouldn't be doing, but that was my family, and that's how I was raised. And so I did. I said, "You know what? I'm glad that when I was a teenager that I had people around me that did not believe like you guys." And I just said, "You know what? I was a good person. I was just raised in a family that was less active, so we didn't follow those commandments or cultural commandments." And I don't know. I just think every time we can do that and stand up against it and push against it and let people see that that's not the gospel, that's just something that's been created by the members, I think that's how we get past it.
I went to Institute one time. I don't know why I had a brain fart on that one. I almost said seminary. It's a little bit past seminary, but Institute. And I was talking with my Institute instructor at the time. He was just a good friend of mine. I loved him. He was just a wealth of knowledge. And he was telling me about a meeting that they had. And this is here in the Portland area, between like church leaders and CES and everything. And at the time it was Elder Packer, and he flew in and kind of got off the plane and was getting ready to start the meeting. And he said, he kind of had this worried look on his face. And he's like, looks out across, all the brethren that were sitting there, and he goes, "Brethren, it is good to be outside of Utah, if only for a day." I mean, he knows, right? He goes through that and he's experienced it. And, I haven't lived in Utah. I've lived in Utah for like 6 months or something like that. And I do remember meeting people there that had lived outside of Utah or had been outside of Utah once in their life to go to Idaho for a weekend. And I'm like, that is the only time you've left like your borders of the state. And, it's not to rip on Utah. Some of the very best members are in Utah. But at the same time, there are some cultural struggles going on there right now that are pretty severe and pretty hard to deal with. So, and maybe somebody from Utah may have some greater insights into this they'd like to share with us. Would love to hear it. So I just think it's a fascinating time that we're in at the moment. So
Thank you, Tom. We appreciate your comment.
No problem.
All right, Evan, you are
So
next.
how do we raise our hand if you're on an iPhone?
Does anyone know?
Don't buy an
We have a few
iPhone.
people- we have a
maybe
few
just
people-
type in the,
Yeah, I was going to say, just type raise your hand
yeah, type raised hand or something like that.
in the chat and I'll write you down.
Just type in iPhone handicapped raised hand.
No, you just hit the more button.
Oh, you hit the more button?
The more button.
it'll-
Okay,
there'll be
those
a-
out there on phones, more button.
You hit the list and it will say raise hand.
Cool.
I have a retarded iPhone.
I like my iPhone.
So do
All right,
I. I was being
okay.
sarcastic.
I know.
Thank you.
So one of the challenges I've had is, having kids and not being, my kids' records are in their mother's ward, is the interactions with church leadership and just being involved. I don't know how many times I've had conversations and just trying to be included in all of my kids' activities and events and in callings and such. And certainly church leaders are caught in the middle, if you will. And when you have an overt mother who is, going out there and kind of really encouraging people not to be inclusive, it's just something that is very difficult. And I just, my heart goes out because being a leader of the church, I'm sure Bishop, that's the last place they want to be, is being caught in the middle. But it's very real, and it's just something that I've had challenges with, and it's in other facets of my kids' interaction as well. But you would hope that behavior wouldn't be in the church. And anytime I get anybody's ear, we all have callings in the church and may interact with divorcees as well. And I'm just try to encourage them to, the best policy is to communicate openly with everybody and not to be, partial towards one side or the other.
Yeah, I will say this is one topic that I have very close and intimate empathy with you on, because I too have felt the church being used as a weapon in a way, with children as kind of the tool to say, you can't go to a baptism or you can't do this or something like that. And the sad reality is the church has a very serious problem with the church handbook of instruction being too vague around this. And it's becoming more and more of an issue of people running into this and running into problems where the leaders are stuck in a position to say, well, we don't want to be put in the middle. Well, you know what? I hate to break it to you, but you are stuck in the middle, whether you like it or not. And so the real fix to this is we got to have some clarity around how that functions, right? I mean, church leaders can wipe their hands and say well, I'm not going to get involved. Well, you know what? The church is involved because the church is the one that is being used as the weapon. And right. So this is, I'm 100% on board with you on this.
I mean, there's custody periods and exchanges that, depending on extra or church activities that come into play, and custodialship and exchanging and there's certainly, man, it can get bad, and you kind of have to take a step back and get out of the heat of the moment of things. But the point being is that it is such a difficult area that church leaders are in the middle of, whether they want it to be or not. Mm-hmm. And I'd like to have some confirmation here, but and maybe talk to somebody who's in a ward clerk capacity. But my understanding is that you can now, if your kid's records lie with the custodial parent, that the non-custodial parent can actually have I don't know if they call it a mirror image or a duplicate. The kids' records can also reflect under your membership as well. and I guess the point there being is that, if you don't live in the same state as your kids, that it is great if the kids' records are also, linked to their other parent, so that their leaders can actually reach out and contact you if they so choose to. I go so far as to, try to keep in touch with all their leaders as best as I can, but I still, reach a lot of closed doors, or just people that aren't willing to go, they just don't want to be involved per se.
Yeah.
But very real problem is what I'm just kind of, I'm sure there's others that could probably sympathize with that.
Well, there's, speaking to the culture on this, there's kind of a cultural norm with the church that the church protects the church, right? The leaders don't want to do anything and shouldn't do anything. And I completely agree with them that brings bad light on the church in any subject. And so when a thing like this happens, where you've got a spouse or somebody else who's got custody or partial custody or whatever, and then they start saying, well, now I'm going to start doing all these games with the church and ordinances and things you can do and things you can't do. And the church wants to say, well, you know what? I don't want to bring a bad name to the church. I don't want to be involved. You are involved, whether you like it or not. You are involved, and you have to do something.
But they'll plead the fifth. I mean, your church leadership will, they'll send you a notice of pleading the fifth, and we don't want any part of it.
Yeah.
At some point. And you can understand why, because there are all sorts of legal ramifications to it.
It's like basically having two people in an arena, and you throw in the weapon to the one and say, oh, well, I don't want to get involved if they start clubbing you over the head with that. I'm not going to stop them. Well, don't give them the tools. Help clarify the situation, and that takes the responsibility away. So anyways, I could get on my soapbox forever about this one. But
yeah, I kind of refer to it as the Gadiantoning going on, and just encourage people not to be part of the Gadiantoning, right? And the best policy is just to communicate open, and that's what the best thing is for the kids, right? Is just to, be above board and communicate to both parents, and hopefully it'll turn out right. But
yeah,
that's all I had.
All right,
Thank you.
thank you, Evan.
Thanks, Evan.
Okay, next we have Jared. Jared, did you still have a question? I saw your hand went down. Maybe not.
I had
Okay.
3 hands up or something for a little.
Yeah, now we have Katrina. Katrina's next.
Katrina, Joshua, and then Tanya.
Yep. Katrina, are you there? Maybe she stepped away from her iPad, or maybe she can't figure out her.
Let's run to Joshua. Oh, she's coming on.
Okay, she coming?
Oh, we got dual battle
Okay, let's
here.
do Katrina first. And then
Sorry,
we'll do
I kept
Josh.
pressing it and it wasn't happening.
Okay.
I'm like, I'm doing it. Just thanks for doing this, you guys. And yeah, I think so I sometimes have felt some of this stuff being divorced, but my ex is a non-member. And so I didn't really face, we never went to church really together or any of that. But I've definitely faced a lot of the struggles with the guys we were just talking about. None of my kids are baptized. And also my oldest son says that he's gay. So not only am I the divorced pariah mom, I also have these weird kids that are not, really normal. They only come every other week, and they're very removed from the ward. And it's very difficult even to get the young men's leaders and the primary leaders to involve them. And I know that it takes a little more work than maybe some of the other families in the ward, but even before COVID, they don't really reach out. They don't take that extra effort that it takes. And it is a little bit disheartening, but like everyone said, we need to just try to make our needs known, I guess, to the leadership, and do our best to not judge and treat other people like Christ would. But it's nice to have these forums to hear that we're not alone and that other people are going through the same struggles. So
Thank you. Yes, it does feel good to know that there are other people in the same boat as you. And, obviously all of our experiences are going to be slightly different from one degree or another, but it can often feel like a very lonely path that we're on, and having some sort of common community and common like experience with other people helps just feel like you're not the only one struggling through this.
Yeah.
That's the beautiful thing about the Saviors, right? He experienced it. He didn't just kind of observe it from afar and say, well, I've seen this a million times. He can go down and be there for each one of us and say, yeah, I actually felt that. I know exactly what you're going through because I was there. I experienced it. It's not good. So he can more
below.
definitely succor us.
That's right.
Yeah.
And Katrina, I mean, I'm kind of going through the same thing on my end. I mean, my ex fell away from the church, and I've got 3 girls who are old enough to be in young women's, and my ex has made it very clear that she'll do everything she can to prevent them from getting baptized or what have you. And the only thing I can say is, stay in contact with those leaders, and have them reach out, and sometimes it takes some work on your end. But eventually, even if they don't, if the kids don't stay active or they fall away, the best thing that you can do on your end is to be that example to them. I worked with a guy who his parents were temple workers, and I mean, they went every weekend, and he ended up falling away from the church, wanted nothing to do with church. I mean, when I started working with Varsity, he wanted nothing to do with it. He was there to collect a paycheck, and that was it. Don't talk to him about the Book of Mormon. Don't talk to him about anything. And, that time that I was there, I slowly saw the change in his heart. And now he is sealed to his wife in the temple. He's got 4 kids, and he's really strong in the church. Elders Quorum president. And it's amazing to see him make that change, all because his parents never gave up. They stayed true to the gospel. They stayed true to the standards and to the covenants that they had made. And in the long run, it worked out. One of the prophets have told us that if we stay true and honor our commitments to the church and live a righteous life, that our children who fall away will come back to the church. And that is a promise, and it will happen. And that's all I can do for my kids. I try and get them involved and keep the leadership involved with my kids, despite my ex's attempts. But the only thing that I can do is live my life the way that the Savior would have me live it, and wait for the blessing.
Yeah, and don't forget the power of prayer, Katrina. A mother's prayers are extremely, extremely powerful. Don't ever give up.
Yeah.
Yep. The other thing I was going to say, there is a book that I read with my oldest son by Charlie Bird called Behind the Mask, and it is a phenomenal book. It is specifically about, he was the Cougar mascot and the valedictorian that came out in his BYU speech. But I found myself relating to a lot of it just because like most of us, we're not your typical Mormons and we're a little bit different. So it was a phenomenal book. So I would highly recommend that for anyone to read.
Yeah, type it in the chat. So in case someone get that. Thank you, Katrina.
Thank you.
All right, see ya. Okay, next we have Joshua Watson. If he's there.
Trying to share video, but it says.
Oh, because we probably stopped you. Let me get you back on there.
Yeah, you threatened to kick me out last time, Celeste.
I know, I'm pretty tough, so I'll take you out.
So I was gonna answer Evan's question. Yes, they have the mirroring to where you can have dual records for both wards that your kids are in. You just have to get with your clerk and sometimes the stake to make sure that that happens correctly. I've got a situation where I only see 3 of my 5 daughters, so it's interesting and it's difficult sometimes with the baptism. Luckily, my last one finally got baptized, but it was a fight. It was really a battle. But to like Katrina and the others, stand your ground. The stake president, they have the handbook, and luckily mine was able to read it and follow it and get things sorted out, but it still was a battle. So don't be afraid. Like Celeste said, there's a lot of cultural commandments out there, but there's a book that gives us guidance, and we need to just obey it. And if we feel it's not right for us, it's not right for us.
All right. Thank you, Joshua.
Awesome. Thanks.
Tanya, you're up. There she comes. There she is.
Okay, so hold on. Let me turn it down because I'm on a Mac like you, Celeste, and
Ah,
you'll be
I
able
knew
to.
you were smart, Tanya. I could tell by the way you look there.
She looks like a Mac user.
She does. She looks
Sorry.
smart.
We call it Handy Max.
Okay. All right. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. First of all, I'm a convert to the church. So this is only my second meeting here. So this has really been a lot of fun and I'm really enjoying it. But I have to say, like going back to the beginning of the meeting, definitely I was blessed to be in a ward that was very welcoming. I came in as a single person, so no one ever knew me as a married person. But there was still definitely, they set you aside. And I think the hardest part for me was they tried to group me with all of the women that have never been married. So being a mom of, 4 kids and being married for 24 years, I just had such a trouble relating with these girls. And then I was assigned to as calling for a preschool teacher. And I found it really hard because they said, well, this person can be in the room with these teachers because they're males, but you're not allowed to be in the room alone with them because you're not married. But I'm thinking, what makes my standards and my morals any less than theirs? So, but that's just, I think the culture in a smaller community, because I'm also new to Utah. I came from California, and here it's a little more relaxed. But I think what I was thinking was when we were talking about just people's morals and values, I think the biggest thing that I noticed of being a convert was I was a convert to the church, but not a convert to Christ. So that's a really long story. And I didn't just join the church overnight mostly because I was so apprehensive because I did know Christ and I wanted to make sure that I was coming to the right church. So what I found though, when I came into the church is that there are a lot of people that are in the church that think that they are following Christ because they just have a church member status, but they're not really following Christ. So I think what we're seeing is a lot of these people are falling away because they really don't have that core connection with him.
Yeah, I would agree that, there's kind of a tendency to want to do in the church, kind of if you jump through the hoops, you're going to get where you're going to go. And I think that sort of defeats the purpose of just having a personal relationship with Christ and really building that relationship. The church is a vehicle to help you have that relationship and grow that relationship and gain the ordinances necessary to enhance that and return to him. Not just here's a vehicle, jump through the hoops, forget about your relationship. And if you do X, Y, and Z, you're going to be fine. You're kind of missing the whole point of having a church if that's the case. So I appreciate your comments. Yeah, I think you're 100% spot on. Like having that relationship with Christ is the most important thing, and the church is there to help guide and enhance that.
Right. I agree.
Tanya, it sounds like we need to have you on the show in the hot seat at some point. Yeah, I think you got some things to say. I'm kind of thinking, all right.
Jot down your name here.
Right, there's a
She's
story.
got a
here.
great
We're gonna need
story
to-
about her conversion and the long process. That might be a good show.
Hey,
Right.
I mean, she is a Mac user and she does have 4 kids and she
Oh.
was married 24 years. Guess what, Tanya? Me. 4 kids, 24 years Mac user. I knew you were
That's
good.
scary. There's 2 Celeste, not 1.
I'm telling you. There's
Yeah.
too many out there. All right. Thank you, Tanya.
No, thank you, you guys.
Thanks.
All righty. Veronica, you're up.
Hi guys, I'm not going to show video because before you started your fireside, I was shoveling snow with my neighbor for an hour, so I'm kind of gross. Anyway, thanks for letting me participate, and because so many of you don't know who I am, I'm a little bit blunt, but I'm also really funny. So please take everything, as being that of what I'm going to say. This has more to do with something that was mentioned earlier in the fireside, which has to do with the singles program itself. Once upon a time in 1997, I joined the singles program at the age of 18. So I've been a single for a long time. I've never been married. I don't have kids. And the program has definitely changed. And a lot of times people think, oh, well, you were in the YSA program. Well, in Iowa, a lot of conferences and activities are both YSA and single adult. And when I started the singles program, there was no mid-singles at all. So as time has changed, and some of you might know that within probably the last decade, the mid-singles propped up, right? This program started mainly because there were more and more singles not getting married right away after their mission or after college. And then also there were an increased number of divorces happening. So the mid-singles program was created to kind of fill the void of that singles programming for that age group. One of the things I found really difficult, and then I'll get to the actual point that I wanted to make today, but is the divorced people totally infiltrated our program. This has been a growing pain situation for me as an always singles or forever single person. You guys have totally changed the aspect of our activities, of workshops, and not that it's necessarily a bad thing, but it's just so many divorced people and so many people with kids. And a lot of times programming is geared towards them and not those of us that haven't experienced all of that. And so that has been a growing pain, at least in my area of the world, with church singles. But what I'd like to help, I guess, seeing that I've been in the singles program for such a long time, is that you guys need to have your voices heard. And a lot of you are saying that you would like to see more, like maybe therapy groups for divorcees, which I think is great. But you have to be pushy. You have to constantly go to your leaders, both your ward, branch, stake leader, even your high councilman, and approach them and talk with them. There should be a high councilman and a stake member, stake presidency member that's in charge of singles, as in older singles above 31 plus. You need to talk to them and say, hey, there's a group of us that would like to help create this programming. Be pushy. In Iowa, I've had to be pushy in my ward when nothing was going on, and we ended up getting 11 active people when we had over 500 on our roster. But that means we had a lot of people that were less active. So 11 was actually really good because they were the active ones going to church, right? But it gives you an opportunity when you ask for that roster, who should be in our singles program? And they give you that roster, and then you can go meet people and invite them to activities and bring them back into the fold. It's really a great way to get members to come back to church. So these are just some suggestions for you guys, but don't be scared. I know you guys aren't. I mean, you guys are having your own little fireside here in our group. So I know you're not scared to do these things, but go and be pushy, because you have to remember there's a lot of leadership, just like you've been expressing how it's almost taboo to talk about divorce. Well, it's taboo to talk about divorced singles, right?
Yeah.
So they're going to
I think
be,
it goes both ways. I think it's hard
Yeah.
to be single and it's hard to be divorced because neither of those scenarios is a complete family. So
correct.
yeah, I think
And
you're
so you
you're
have
right.
leadership that doesn't know. And think about it, a lot of you that are now divorced, single people are like, haha, now you know how we feel. But a lot of times we did feel discarded. But there's
Right.
some wards and there's some stakes that are really good at the programming and involving singles in activities with the whole ward, or to help create their activities and be supportive of their conferences and things like that. But you have to be pushy. You have to go after it. And even if it's like a whole posse of you, go to your ward, your bishop, or go to your stake president and say, hey, we're already doing this online, so why don't we just go ahead and do this in our stake?
I think that is a great idea. And I think it's true. The more we push, the more we'll get. So the squeaky wheel gets the oil, right? So,
That's
all right. Thank you, Veronica. We appreciate that.
So
Yeah,
I
no
can
problem.
speak to this just a little bit of what
Yeah.
Veronica was saying. Several years ago, and I won't say how many because I don't want to age myself too much here, but
Oh, you're younger than me.
my stake president came to me and he's like, hey, look, we need to build a program. We've got a little bit of a problem here where we've got girls that are going in, because it used to be 18 to 30 is YSA, and then it's like 31 till death is like single adults, right? And they
Correct. Yeah. Yep.
a mid-singles program, at least in our area. I know Utah is kind of always a little ahead of the curve. They've kind of got stuff going on. And so like we want to build a mid-singles program. And I'm like, okay, well, what do we need to do here? And obviously, if you go to them and you start talking about like, well, these people want to get married, right? Then they're going to start shutting down and say, well, we don't want to just build something for everyone to get married. That's like a dating app or something. But once people get to that 30 age, and then if they don't get married, there's a large drop off in activity. They just sort of tend to like leave the church in large respects. So yeah, 46 plus, you don't count. Yeah, pretty much, Brian. So, so these girls that kind of had the problem, I mean, they were going to dances. They were like 32, 33, right? And then you got these guys that are in their 60s and 70s coming up and hitting on them like, hey, you want to dance? And they're like, are you kidding me? Like, dude, you're old enough to almost be my grandpa. But
Or dad, come on.
Yeah, Corey.
Grandpa.
An older dad. So, well, if they're in their 70s, I mean, you're talking like a 40-year difference there. So it could happen. So anyways, long story short, like, the whole purpose of the program was to round people up and to find those people who are, as was pointed out, they're on the books somewhere, but a lot of times they're just lost in the cracks. And they need to have some sort of like connection to the church again. And if they don't feel, I mean, this goes back to us going to church in the first place. If you don't feel like there's anything there for you, people stop going in large respect, right? I go to church on Sundays. I don't feel like I'm welcome there. I don't feel like I fit in. I'm going to stop going. And that happens all too often. So these programs are important to try and get people to kind of have some sort of commonality, some sort of glue to stick to. So yeah, thank you very much for that, Veronica. I mean, you're spot on. And these programs are kind of there, and they come and they go, and you just, I mean, obviously Brian outlined the kind of the age range of the groups. And if there's not one of those in your area, go to your leaders, because this is not blazing new trails that they're like, oh, the church doesn't have anything in the programs for this. They don't have anything like that. Yes, they do. It might not be in your area, so work to establish it.
That's right. All right. Thank you, Veronica.
Lori.
Yep.
All right. Next we have Lori Metzger.
Oh, here we go. Here comes Lori.
Uh-oh. He's got lots of fans out
Garrett.
there.
Oh,
Not a problem.
start my video.
Yep. Start your video. There you go.
Hi. So if Garrett didn't want me to speak, maybe he shouldn't have told me all about this last night. That's how I learned about you.
I opened my
trouble now.
Oh,
He also
you have no
told us
idea.
that he wouldn't fill up the whole time and he'd be done after like 20 minutes. What happened?
Oh,
But
that's
it's-
right. We
Okay,
can't
we all
let him
know
off
Garrett's
that
been-
easy. Come on.
Yeah,
I seriously
We're gonna
tried.
make it warm.
I know Garrett fairly
Garrett's
well.
got lots to say.
Anyway, so I just wanted to say thank you for doing this, for doing the topics and stuff. This was really enlightening. I really related to a couple of things that's kind of why I rose my hand. Normally I am very talkative when I get to know people and very shy when I'm first initially doing things, which is such a contrast.
She's a silent type. You have to worry about.
Don't even. Okay, was it Everett? I don't know what
I go by anything. Just say, hey, you.
anything. Hey, anything.
That guy
anything
with the
but
really
comment.
cool hat on. We'll just say that.
No, it ain't.
No, I don't know that I go that far. So you made a comment about it's about the relationship with Christ and that church was a vehicle for that. And then I also really related to a gal, Katrina, that shared, that's when I raised my hand and things, because my ex left the church a year after we got married. The culture that I grew up in was a very crazy culture, right? Like we've all had our varieties of cultures. Like you said, Celeste, it's like, we all have our cultures of where we grew up in and what we had. I was the very first person in my family to get divorced. That was really hard. But it was also just the fact that my ex-husband left the church and we didn't know how to deal with that. Church didn't know how to deal with that. Their thing of they would come up to me and say, you just keep doing what you're doing and he'll come back. And I think that there was this level of disappointment and level of expectation that I thought that if I just did enough, that it would. Sorry, I don't even know why I'm getting all emotional. Like I hate crying.
Okay.
You never cry. Someone get a
I
life
never
after
cry. Exactly,
Yeah.
Garrett.
That's the thing.
You're
Like they
in
should
good
never put
company.
that
Good
pressure
job,
on you.
Garrett. You made her cry. How do you feel now?
I have that effect on people. I'm used to it.
No,
But
but Lori, whoever told you that should never have put that pressure on you because you have zero effect on his choices.
And that's just it, is that affected my relationship when my marriage fell apart. And I learned that for 10 years I had been married to a lie.
Yep.
And so basically going back to church to people that didn't know how to relate to me, didn't know what to say. They saw the horror that was my 3 years of divorce and they didn't know what to do. And like I knew this and I tried to accept them, but they didn't know how to relate to me. And they, in essence, basically just shunned me because they didn't know how to deal with my hard situation. And I couldn't just hide it. And so I was really overly truthful with a lot of people. And they were just like, holy shit, like what the hell happened? Like, that's a lot. Like, and I was even told by people, well, you must have not been doing something good enough. And on the opposite side, I had one guy telling me who wasn't a Mormon, where it's like, well, you're following false prophets and that's why you're this. And so being married to basically a self-proclaimed atheist, it's like it threw me into a tailspin, but it threw my children into a tailspin. And that's where I really related to Katrina, because basically my children also didn't know how to be dealt with. And I've refrained from teaching my children about what's my truth and what's my experience with church, but also trying to cultivate into a culture where I can try to get them to learn about church. And for me, I had to ultimately leave church to find a root in gospel truths again, and to be able to reestablish that connection with, when I went into this group and it was a God of your understanding, and to relate to a God as you understand God is very much in essence this culture of understanding for the first time in my life that I had a Heavenly Father and a Jesus Christ relationship based on what somebody else was telling me to do. And I had never actually done that for myself, even though I believed that I had. And that I was now needing to reteach that to my children, and to be able to accept them, that they have a father and a mother who they both care about, and they feel put in the middle more than they've ever felt with church, especially. And so to understand that I have absolutely no control over I sure as heck didn't have any control over it in my marriage, and I don't have any control over that with my children. That all that I can do is to accept them as they want to show up, and to encourage them to have that connection with Christ, because that's where it all starts. And that's where I think that I really related with this topic is that the culture is so harmful, where people think that they're being helpful because they just don't know what they're doing, because they want to help you so much that if you just do what I'm doing, it will work for you too. And people don't understand that that's not how it works, that I have to figure out what works for me in my situation, because that's my situation. And it goes back to the acceptance. And I really loved how you said that it's, you know, Christ wants us all to accept each other. It's, you know, we aren't expected to, yeah, there's commandments that some people choose to change or to follow, and it's not our place to say, well, you can't do that any more than they can tell us how to do that. And so basically to cultivate a culture of where we are just accepting no matter what we do, and that's your judgment place with God and with Christ at the end of the day. And if you're trying, that's all that really matters. And so that's, sorry, this kind of went off from where I originally went, but basically
Okay.
I really enjoyed this topic. I'm really glad that I got to be a part of it. I don't know, I haven't used Facebook in 2 years, so I'm trying to figure out how to follow you guys so I can learn more about, you know, doing more of these. But
well, we have
yeah,
them every
basically.
Sunday, every Wednesday, same place, same time. So Sunday,
Every Sunday?
every Sunday,
Every Sunday. They can't get
Well,
enough of
I have
talking.
every Sunday and Wednesday, same time,
Wow.
same place.
Garrett
But
wants
yeah,
to come on every Sunday.
Please
We
find
just
our
won't let him.
Facebook page.
No, I don't
Is
want to
it
come on every
Facebook
Sunday.
page?
No.
Because it looked like an add friends thing, but I'll figure out. I'll work with somebody, Tom or Garrett or somebody.
Yeah, we have a
Yeah,
page
it'll be
and
fun.
a group and a personal page too. So there's
Just
3.
check out the chat. There's some people
Yeah.
loading it up. For you.
Yeah.
Okay.
But
We'll
thanks
do
for
that.
sharing your comments with us.
Yeah,
Yeah,
thank
But
I
you
probably
know, Lori,
overshared a little bit, but that's okay.
you know, Lori, going through that, I mean, it's made you who you are, and having known you for the year or so, I mean, you're a pretty awesome person to have gone through all that and turned out the way you are. You've got some great kids. I mean, you come into your home, you can feel the spirit. So you're doing the right thing. I mean, it was a hard thing to go through, and you've shared your story with me, but look where you are now and look at the blessings that you received going through that. And you will continually be blessed because of it. You know, let your past shape you, but don't let it define you.
Oh,
If
that's
that makes any sense.
that's
All
right.
It's
right.
actually up on my wall.
Oh, good.
Yes, I know it is. And that's why I
Read
say
about
that.
it. So
And that's why I say that. I mean, you're on the right path, and just keep doing you. All right.
Yeah.
Yep.
Thanks for coming.
Thanks for coming on, Lori. Good luck.
Awesome.
Thanks
Thanks.
for sharing your story. All right, Jeff. So we're gonna do 3. We got Jeff, Christine, and then Jared, and then we're not gonna be able to take any more since we're already like 40 minutes overdue. But we'll go Jeff. Is he here?
Jeff, welcome to the show.
Jeff's iPhone. I don't know. Maybe he fell asleep. Maybe he's having a hard time coming on.
There he is.
Oh, there he is.
There he is.
All right.
Stuff's happening. Stuff's happening.
He's got an Apple product, so we'll give him
Hey.
I got an apple pie. I got the beard going for you guys.
Oh,
so,
cool.
Yeah, I don't want you to feel
Ah,
left out. Yeah, you guys are. Well, I'll give some light. I'm in the kitchen right now. Yeah, it's interesting to listen to your comments. I have lived out of state, so it's pretty cool listening to some of your thoughts. I can relate. I just didn't go and visit, one state and leave. I'm actually currently a ward missionary in the state of Utah. So it's been very enlightening being around you guys and learning what some of the thoughts of probably even members of Utah are struggling with at whatever age group they are. I think it really goes back to the main point is I recently attended a conference in California for the church. And I don't know if it was put on the church or not, but it was a really spiritual conference and strengthening testimony overall. And yeah, I think it's great to listen to other people's points of view and then to go ahead and see where your testimony stands specifically. I know one sure fact is there's no way that I can relate to each one of you. Everyone relates differently because everyone has their own path. Fascinating thoughts shared tonight. Maybe I'll check you guys out again, if I'm not bored. If I'm not bored at all.
Well, we wouldn't want to bore you, so if you can find time in your schedule.
Days, you'll
But yeah, I
find
know
us
the
here.
schedule.
Yeah.
Yeah, you guys,
Thank you,
you guys
Jeff.
know how the schedule is for sure. But I think it really comes deep down to our testimonies. And
Yep.
I have a bishop right now that I work with, and I think it's very important to develop that relationship with the bishop, and to just be open and honest with them, tell them how you're feeling, even if you've had other bishops in the past that did not listen to you. Just take advantage of. Just try to, as you said, Celeste, say your prayers,
Yeah.
and have a little faith, because we do know our Heavenly Father is listening to us, and the Savior Himself has felt every pain, suffering that we feel, and currently are feeling, as I've heard from the conversations tonight. And so I didn't really have much else to say. I just want to encourage everyone as members of the church to stay strong. In the age group, you have given me a thought. They did call recently a new single adult representative, and I think it's time for me to get in touch with them and motivate that person to do their calling, because if they're not doing their calling, we're left out in the cold, as you
Yeah,
said.
be that squeaky
specifically.
wheel.
Yeah, as you said specifically. So yeah, I'll check out your Facebook again and your YouTube pages. I'm glad to know you guys are still continually strengthening your testimony from each other, just by your thoughts and your feelings overall. And just encourage us all to be the best we can. And I think you said, Celeste, you said, be a good example, and that goes a long way. And I'm just taking notes from you guys, of course.
Well, thanks, Jeff.
Thank you
Thank
so
you. I
much.
appreciate that.
Keep up the good work, man.
We're glad you're here to share your thoughts with us. Thanks, Jeff. All right, next we have Christina. Oh, you're muted.
Nope,
Can
she's
you
muted.
unmute? Maybe she can unmute.
Uh-oh.
We're double dutying you. Sorry. There you go. Sorry.
Okay. No, you're fine. This has been a really interesting topic, but it's also enlightening. One of the experiences I had, I might get a little bit of a boo on this one, but it's a little bit of a taboo in the church cultures. Or going through the divorce. Of course, I'm meeting with the bishop and whatnot, and I remember that one night, and I was like, I have to talk to the bishop. Maybe he knows the answer for this, because I'm pretty lost when it comes to the entire process. And so I was thinking, met up with the bishop, and then I asked him about intimacy. So now that you're in this divorce phase, you no longer have that intimacy with that other person. And so there was a part of me that's like, oh, what do I do with this? With myself, or with how I was lost pretty much. And so I asked the bishop about, like, Bishop, this is just out of curiosity, what happens to that part of the relationship, because it's dead.
Yeah.
And this is when I realized that there is definitely a limitation for what the church can provide, and the bishops are not our therapists, fortunately and unfortunately. But at the same time, it was refreshing that I was, in a way, paired up with the bishop that's very understanding. However, how we answered that question at that time was like, I will have to connect you with the sisters who are in the same space in the Relief Society, so you can share with them your struggle about the intimacy. And I was like, I will not share this with the sisters as far as what I just shared with you. And so I felt at that time, it's like, okay, this is going to be a journey that I will have to discover, but the church is there for the guidance as far as this particular question I had. And what I learned along the way is that removing that self-judgment and see where this path takes you and see what you learn from it. Again, the church will always going to be there, and and I'm grateful that we have, guidance. But as a human being, wanting to express that intimacy if you are in a relationship, if you're not in a relationship, like no judgment whatsoever. It's like you do you. But that was one of the interesting, experience I figured, worth sharing, because I feel like nobody tends to talk about these things, and it's
Nope.
uncomfortable. And sometimes it's okay. I feel like I just want to have like the Sex and the City sisters in my relief society so we can talk about this.
Well, you'll have that conversation with us. Like
I
we're,
know.
Exactly. That's why this is a good time to share it with the group, because again, nobody talks about this, and you're shamed when something like this, when you're with your married friends, you get judged right away because of course they are in a different path, they're in a different experience, and you're just thrown into this pool of 35 and up. I can't even be in a YSA, even though I feel like I can fake it in the YSA group.
You totally fit in.
But I don't want to be kicked out though.
You know, it's interesting, Christina, when I moved into my new ward a few months back, my bishop brought me in. He's my age. I think he's a year older than me. And he gave me the sex talk. He's like, okay, it's like you're now in this single post-marriage scenario. And he sat there and he just discussed everything with me. And I was all right. But most bishops don't. Like, he was open for questions and discussion.
Yeah.
And he went over his spiel to me and stuff. And but that's not the norm, I don't think. He was very open.
It's not. Yeah. Absolutely. So that's
I think some
that's
bishops
not
are
typical.
comfortable with that topic, but
Yeah.
don't worry, we're here for you. Post in the groups, direct message people, come visit us. We had a great sex conversation.
Yeah.
If you look at the old podcast on
Jennifer's
YouTube.
podcast. Yep.
Yeah, go check that one back out. And
Jennifer was February 10th. It was all about sex.
Okay.
Someone wants to hear
Perfect.
about that. It's a good
I will
one.
check it out tonight.
And just as kind of a precursor, we are going to be having some shows coming up about different sexual topics in the church and struggles that people face. And Jennifer, our local sexpert, is going to be joining us for advice on those. So be on the watch for those. They're in the works. They're in the pipeline.
And we have Christina who's going to come on and be a life coach coming up on March 3rd. Woo! So we're going to have her back as well. So you guys can't miss out. Okay, thank you, Christina. We'll see you soon.
Jared put his hand down, but
I know, Jared, do you still want to make a comment? You were last
Well,
on the list.
I think Tanya left, so I didn't know if I should still answer. I was going to try to answer.
Tanya
her,
Thompson's still here.
Tanya Thompson's still here.
Is that the one that was the convert?
Yep.
Yes.
Oh, okay. She was saying something about the people in her ward came to her and told her not to that she couldn't be by herself.
Right.
I think there might have been a misunderstanding. Usually it is a male has to have two, but the church does try to put newer converts with someone that's a stronger member in the primary, so that way they don't feel like they're under the pressure of giving the wrong stuff or as they're learning, so I'm hoping that's where they were trying to go, and they made the wrong comments to you, Tanya. But that's just what, from my experience, I've been a member my whole life. Even after my divorce, my ward, they didn't treat me any differently. I take that back. There was a couple of the men, they started looking at me like if I was talking to their wife too long, they would come over and like put their arm around their wife. But I think that was just more of a, maybe I think they might have just feared the beard, but anyways. But I think that's where I'm hoping that's where the person in your ward was trying to go with, was saying that they didn't want you by yourself only because you said you're a convert yourself. And so that's when you're teaching young, the youth or anybody, they try to they pair you with a stronger member or somebody who's, been there a little bit longer, just so that way, it's all new to you. They don't want you to, like you said, I think someone else said it earlier, the youth are impressionable and so are the children. And so they try to make sure we have someone there that's, that's experienced, that knows what they're talking about and can guide you and help you to make sure you do it right. But the great thing about the primary and all that is if you follow the little books, and the lesson plan, it's all right there. And it's simple. It's the simplest thing. And that's what I think a lot of people do is we try to complicate the gospel. We don't just stay to the primary questions and answers. And if we would just stay on the primary question and answers, it would make things so much smoother and easier for everybody else. We start to get our own interpretation. I think someone said earlier about the white shirt stuff. I used to sell cars. So I wore the brightest colored shirts I can find. And so I would still go to church on my mornings that I'd have to go to the car lot, and I'd have a bright pink, bright purple.
Hey,
and I
nothing
had,
wrong with bright pink.
hey, I mean, whatever to stand out, because you have to stand out of the car lot. I wasn't allowed to have my beard. They wanted me to clean shaven, so I had to find something else. But anyways, there was a member of the bishopric, and he was an older gentleman, and I think this is where the cultural part comes in. He kind of made a comment to me, and then he also kind of made a comment to one of the young men. And I was at that time, I was the Deacons Quorum advisor, and I said, look, that kid is here. You will not deny him the chance to pass, because that might be his only time he ever passes. And if you spoil it for him, then you're going to have, there's going to be repercussions. So I always kind of, like you said, or someone else was saying it, we got to raise our voices. We got to make sure that we don't allow our cultural interpretation of the gospel to influence the gospel. There's a big difference between church and gospel, and that's what most people get those two confused. And so I'm rambling now. I know you guys said it's late, so I'll just go ahead and cut it short, because I think you guys want to.
Yeah.
So
thanks for your comments, Jared.
Sharing that, Jared.
Yeah, no, thank you. I appreciate that.
And I think my hat's better. I mean, I know it's a different sport, but my hat's better.
But
Everett,
you're not
sorry.
representing the My Little Ponies. That's all that matters.
Hey, well, normally I should have went and threw my 49ers hat on, but today I'm repping the
49ers, baby.
Coordinate, so
49ers, baby.
Corey would have been happy with that.
Jared, we need to get you in the hot seat too, man.
You guys don't want me in the hot seat.
Oh yeah.
Oh man.
Y'all need to
We
go.
need to
Whoever's
do that hot
interested.
seat show.
Yeah, y'all need
Don't
to
feel-
go and fill out an application on our group page.
Oh, I don't fill out applications. I'm sorry. It's against my religion.
We just asked for like your bank account information, your social security, and all your private.
And the PIN
passwords.
number.
It's not a big deal,
That's okay. I don't have anything left over. The ex got all it all. So no.
Well, thanks for
I'm
coming
kidding.
out,
I'm
Jared,
kidding.
for your
All right.
comments.
All right, thanks, man.
Wow, that was a great night. Looks like
No, it's
we went
uh,
late. We even have time for a
hour.
little after party.
an hour late. So anyway.
Always.
That's right.
Maybe we'll do a 5-minute. Everybody comes on, and then we'll see where it goes.
So let's let Everett close it out here first, and
Yeah. Well, yeah, let's close it out. So Garrett, we had a lot of interest in this topic tonight, obviously. And but you are the main guest for the show tonight. So I want to thank you. And I'm just happy to have you in the hot seat tonight. I know it's not always a comfortable thing. A lot of people get on, they get real nervous. So hopefully it wasn't too bad for you, but I appreciate you. I appreciate the comments you had, and except for, hating on the Broncos, now we're
come
mortal
on.
enemies. So, now that I know.
Well, no, thanks for having me. Celeste has been trying to get me on since, October, November last year. And
in a
just,
while. Lassoing
Yeah.
you and getting you in that chair is like pulling teeth. So
between kids and the business and the fire station, it's a busy schedule. Grab me when you can, and if you don't, it's a rough one. I mean, even my own mom's like, "Hey, I want to come up and visit," and I'm like, "Well, how's about 2 weeks from now? Sound good?" And and she's only a couple hours down the road, but this was a good topic. I mean, there was a lot brought up and a lot discussed, and definitely a lot of people, from what I gathered, walked away with a lot of great input. And this was a great topic, and there's definitely more that can go into it. I mean, there's parts of the challenges of the church culture that we didn't get to tonight, because we kind of went down different trails, but there's still more to this topic. And I think the takeaway from this is, despite cultural differences, despite the challenges, remember who you are. I mean, you're a son and daughter of our Heavenly Father, and he has expectations just like any parent. And if we follow those expectations, we'll be eternally blessed. And when it comes to those hardships and being in those hard spots, remember to have a Christ-like love for that person and to have the heart of a child.
Yep.
And always remember, as we've been taught since we were kids, choose the right. But remember who you are, stand up for what you believe, and do the right thing, and everything else will fall into place. And that challenge will turn into a blessing sometime down the road.
Yeah.
Amen.
Thank you. Thank you.
Amen.
Nice.
Thank you. That is a good
Glad
way
we finally
to,
got you on.
yes, that is a good
And
note to
all
end
the
it on.
stories.
Thank you
Yeah.
very much, Garrett. And so just one last reminder for those people in the audience. If you're new to the show, thank you for being here and sticking with us. This was an exceptionally long show, but there was a lot that people had to say on this topic. So clearly it's one we're going to have to revisit again, because I think we could really dig deeper into this for a long time. Give us a like on Facebook if you like what you saw. Subscribe to YouTube, where we're uploading all the videos for this, and just support the podcast. We really enjoy having you. And having said that, I'm going to go ahead and open it up for people to go ahead and